Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, this was the first time my brother was bringing a girl home to meet my parents, so to speak, so this was a big deal for him. It had to mean something, although nobody spelt out the exact words, but we were all congruent, easily on the same page. This had to be serious for my unforthcoming brother to spontaneously be bringing a girl home to meet the family. Doing something like this was completely contradictory to his character, as he kept his seclusive love life sequestered from prying intrusive eyes, especially those of my presumptuous inquisitive parents. My brother Franklin was a very self-effacing, introverted, unassuming, contained person, exactly like my father, both in his personality and his outward appearance. In fact, the two of them were like two quintessential peas in a pod. If you looked at early photographs of my father, when he was 25, Franklin's age, it was quite airy, actually. It was like you were looking at a doppelganger. Both men were like clones of each other, tall, lanky, with golden skin, blonde wavy hair, the bluest, most piercing eyes that you've ever seen. Of course, my dad, now being significantly older than my brother, in his 50s, his blonde hair had thinned out considerably. He would brush it over his naked scalp, to make it look as if there was more hair than there actually was. My dad had a huge bee in his bonnet about his gradual hair loss. It really depressed him. He often wore a cap back to front on his head to cover it up. I thought my father would look so terribly cute if he shaved off all his hair, but the very idea was too dreadful for him to contemplate. He said he didn't want to look like a boiled egg, which seemed nonsensical to me. Whoever put that absurd idea into his head, goodness only knows. My father could never look like a boiled egg. But each to his own. The only time my dad ever brought a girl home to meet his parents, when he was about Franklin's age, was my mother. They ended up marrying each other. I was 20 years old at the time when Franklin brought home this mysterious girl to meet the family. Growing up, I'd always received my bigger brother's consummate, circumspect attention. He'd always looked out for me wholeheartedly, as his younger sister. On one occasion when I was bullied by a couple of kids at school, my brother went and dealt with them on my behalf. Those kids never ever troubled me again. He had always been scrupulously protective towards me. In truth, I had extreme reservations about meeting my brother's girlfriend. I will admit an incongruous small part of me may have been a wee bit jealous of him giving another girl his interminable attention. But I knew I wanted my brother to be happy, so if this girl made him happy, I guess I'd have to be pleased for him. I couldn't comprehend why my pedantic, purist mother was in such a dreadful state that day. My mother was bustling around the kitchen in an anxious frenzy, trying to prepare the luncheon for my brother's special guest. She wanted to make a good impression on his new girlfriend. Shouldn't it have been the other way round, I thought. I could see she looked terribly nervous. Her forehead was covered in perspiration. My mother could be punctilious. She wasn't happy unless everything was fastidiously perfect. Relax, Mum, I teased. What are you worrying about? You'll probably find that Franklin's girlfriend is much more apprehensive and skittish about meeting you than you are about meeting her. Lillian is absolutely right, sweetheart, said my father, who was sitting on the very comfortable couch in the living room, with his legs stretched out on the extension padding that came out of the couch, so he was comfortably sitting back on it like an open bed. It was hardly a wonder he always gravitated towards that chair. He was tapping into his cell phone to access the news. I'm sure the poor girl is more uptight about meeting you than you are about meeting her, he assured my mother. Maybe so, said my mother, but it's terribly important that Franklin's girlfriend is made to feel most welcome. I really want her to like us. More to the point, said my father, glancing up from his cell phone briefly. I hope we like her. I've always worried about that with our kids. Imagine if one of our children marries someone we both hate. Sorry, Lillian, to say that in front of you, but you do have to admit it is a horrifying, alarming thought that has crossed my mind fleetingly. Does that ever happen? Asked my mother. Of course it does, said my father. You hear the most dreadful stories of mother-in-laws at loggerheads with their daughter-in-laws. It's often because the mother thinks no one is ever good enough for her son. Oh dear, said my mother. Please God, may that not be me. I couldn't think of anything worse than not getting on with Franklin's wife. Oh, I'd hate a family rift. Keep your hair on, Liz, laughed my father. Franklin is not marrying this woman. Well, not yet, I hope. He's merely bringing her home for lunch. I'm sure she'll be a jolly nice girl. I'm sure he's got very good taste in women, just like his father. What do they say? Like father, like son. He's a chip off the old block. So if he's anything like me, he has phenomenal, exemplary taste in women, like I did when I married you, my love. But have you met any of his girlfriends before? Asked my mother. Of course not, Liz. None of us ever have. Well, then there you are. How can you say he's got good taste in women if you've never met any of his girlfriends before? Also, if we have not met any of his girlfriends, why is he suddenly bringing this young lady home to meet us? Because it's serious, isn't it? For a long moment, no one said a single word, but it was clear what we were all thinking. We were very fortunate to live in a pretty Boston neighbourhood where the street was lined with towering, majestic oak trees that shaded the entire street, as their huge, extensive boughs created a massive canopy over the road, so walking down the street, it was heavily shaded. Our detached house that stood on a reasonable-sized square of land, as did most of the properties on our street, was recently renovated, a 50s home that had been more modernised, but still possessed some of the house's original character. On the exterior of our detached home, it was very symmetrical, quite plain, as houses were indeed like that in the 50s. But my parents had painted the walls a buttercup yellow, added Wedgwood blue-coloured shutters to the windows, while climbing roses, along with purple wisteria, spiralled generously over the exterior front walls of the home and around the blue front door, giving it that quintessential English country look. Our home on the inside was open-plan living at its finest, where all the rooms blended seamlessly into each other, without any walls. We had sweeping oakwood floors, contemporary artwork on the walls, very attractive rugs, and very sumptuous furnishings. On the rear of our property we had large floor-to-ceiling windows that unfurled onto a sizable wooden deck, commanding a very beguiling view over our backyard, where we had a verdant lawn, a scattering of trees, a pretty rose garden, beds of French lavender, pretty flowers. There was a swimming pool area surrounded by another entertainment porch, with a gazebo pergola, with a retractable roof, a very extensive barbecue fit for a king, sumptuous outdoor furnishings, changing rooms, a cloakroom, and finally a gym. As Boston is a university town, my brother Franklin was attending university there. He was living in a rented house with about 6 other pupils. As at 25 years old, he insisted he couldn't possibly live at home anymore. He said that would be far too humiliating, would rob him of his independence. He enjoyed being a maverick that was self-reliant. He even had 2 jobs in Boston to bring in that extra money, one as a security guard a couple of nights a week, another working in a local hardware store. As my mother was setting the table with gleaming silverware, starched napkins, sparkling glasses, and a pretty arrangement of homegrown roses clustered together in pinks, purples, yellows and creams, all picked from the garden, I saw 2 bicycles cycling down our drive. One was Franklin, the other a young woman whom I'd never seen before, but based on her outer appearance, she looked like any other university student that you would see. "They're here," I told my mother, whom immediately ran to the hall mirror, adjusting her golden locks of hair, before she opened the front door, leaving a few seconds after she heard the knock. She didn't want to appear too eager. Franklin was standing in the doorway with a young woman. She was about 23 years old. She had long dark hair, brown eyes, a fair skin. I suppose she was pretty in a girl next door kind of way. But from the first moment I met her, I didn't warm to her. I'm not sure what it was exactly, but there was something rather disturbing about her. But it was more like an unconscious feeling that I couldn't personally isolate. But I did try to brush the feeling under the carpet. I didn't want to not like Franklin's girlfriend. I really wanted to like her. My mother threw her arms effusively over Franklin. "Darling, it's so great to see you." "Who do we have here?" she asked, looking at Franklin's girlfriend with a broad beam on her face.
"This, Mum, is Barbara. Everybody tends to call her Barbie."
"Hello, Barbie," said my mother, shaking her hand warmly. "I'm delighted to meet you. This is my daughter Lillian over here," she said, pointing to me, "and my husband Barker over there. I know it does sound like a dog's name, but I assure you it isn't. That is his genuine name." The young woman did not laugh at my mother's attempt to be funny, but she smiled awkwardly, her eyes darting around the place like an anxious ferret. Franklin held her hand tightly. I could see a besotted sparkle in his eyes. I hadn't seen that before. I knew at once he really, really liked this girl. He was totally infatuated by her. Before long we were all seated around the table, eating my mother's hot chicken pie, served with a dressed salad, which was delicious. But there were many awkward moments when we just ate, struggled to make any meaningful conversation. "So tell us how you two met," my mother asked Barbie. Barbie looked at my brother. Their eyes met. She giggled. "I met him at a friend's barbecue on a Sunday afternoon, actually. Franklin was grilling the burgers. I was starving hungry, so I waited for him to cook mine. I like it very well done, you see. We got talking. I guess we just clicked. I think we had a lot in common. You know how it is." "So are you also at the university then, I imagine?" "Yes, I am, but I don't live far away from here, actually."
"Would you believe it, Mum? Barbie actually grew up in our neighbourhood. She only lives blocks away from us. Isn't that ironic? It's a small world, and yet we've never ever crossed paths before."
"My parents also live in a 50s house, actually. But ours isn't as nice as yours. You've renovated your place really beautiful. I like the open plan effect of your home. Ours is very dated, stuck in a time warp, but my dad is very old school. He says he likes the character of the place. He doesn't want to change a single thing about it. But me and my mother, we'd love to renovate the place. My dad says it'll have to be over his dead body. So I guess we'll just have to do him in then." No one around the table laughed. My brother Franklin immediately changed the subject to avoid any inappropriate awkwardness. It was the way she'd said, "I guess we'll just have to do him in then," that had made my skin actually crawl. After my brother had left with his girlfriend, riding away on their bicycles, as so many people cycle on bikes in a university town, my mother was washing the dishes while my father dried up and put them away. "So what did you think of her, darling?" my mother asked me. I wrinkled up my nose in distaste. I don't like her at all. The way she said she'd have to do her dad in to renovate their home, the way she said it, it sounded, well, really off-centre. It wasn't funny at all. It almost sounded malicious, as if there was a part of her that would be quite happy to dispose of her dad, almost as if he was surplus to requirements. But then maybe I'm just being dramatic. "I thought so too. Isn't it funny?" said my mother. "I don't know. There was something about her that I just didn't like. I can't fathom what it actually was, but I guess we're just going to have to try and like her for Franklin's sake.
By all accounts, he seemed completely smitten by her. "You two are overreacting. I'm quite sure she's a terribly nice young girl," said my father in such a flat tone of voice. I knew without a shadow of a doubt he wasn't enamoured by her in any way either. He also felt there was something off about her. But why had my brother failed to see in her what we had clearly perceived? By all accounts, I thought my brother was a sagacious, intuitive man. Now, I wasn't exactly sure. Over a period of many weeks, my brother brought Barbie over to the house. Whenever I was in her company and my brother was out of earshot, she became malignantly vicious towards me. "I know you don't like me, Lillian," she virtually hissed, "but I don't like you either. The moment I laid eyes on you, I knew you were trouble." "Excuse me? You don't even know me. What on earth are you talking about?" Her mendacious eyes widened. Her nostrils flared. "If you ever try to attempt to break me and your brother up, you'll be sorry, young lady. I'm going to marry your brother. Come hell or high water, whether you like it or not. When I want something, I always get it. If you try to come between the two of us, there'll be hell to pay. Do you understand?" I gawked at her in astonishment. "Well, why would I try to come between you? My brother really likes you. I can't influence him as to whom he dates." "Don't act all innocent with me, little girl," she snapped. "It's happened to me before. My boyfriend's silly little sister turning her brother against me, feeding him all kinds of spiteful, vindictive lies. Well, it's not ever going to happen again. I'm not about to lose Franklin over his silly little whining tattletale of a sister because she doesn't like me. So keep your nose out of our business, will you? If you know what's good for you, you will, because you'll be sorry, my girl, if you mess with me. Do you understand that? What's your problem? You don't have to be so aggressive towards me. I haven't done anything wrong." "You haven't done anything wrong? Let's just see about that. Who's playing little Miss Innocent now? Butter won't melt in your mouth with me. Franklin told me what you said, that you had your misgivings about me. Now, isn't that lovely?" "Well, it's true. I do have my reservations about you. I don't know you." "Oh, now she gets it, does she? My point exactly. You don't know me. So get your big, fat nose out of my business, will you? Stop meddling in our relationship. Your brother couldn't give an F what you think of me." "You're right. I don't know you. I so apologise for rocking the boat." "It's too late for that, Lillian. You better watch your back, little girl, because if you're picking a fight with me, you better choose your enemies wisely," she said, coming right up to me, so that she was standing a hair's breadth away from my face, her eyes growing wide with indignation, her jaw stiffening, while she literally ground her teeth. "Believe me, girl, you don't want to make an enemy out of me, for you don't know what I'm capable of." "Are you threatening me?" She shrugged her shoulders, gave me a huge fat grin, marching away defiantly. I remember thinking, I really don't like you, Barbie. What the heck does my brother see in you? When I watched her interacting with my brother, she was perfectly lovely, all charm, lots of smiles. There was a definite chemistry between the two of them. I could see my brother was completely beguiled by her. In his eyes, it would seem that she could do absolutely no wrong. The sun literally shone out of her backside. He seemed to hang on to her every word. I so wished my brother would get a glimpse of her dark side, a side he had not been privy to seeing, as she had surreptitiously kept it buried away from him, rather like a squirrel stashing away its nuts for the winter. In my opinion, she was a natural-born actress. She could blow hot and cold as fast as you could say Jack Robinson. One minute she would be smiling at my brother with the warmest smile that could make ice melt. Then when her back would turn, she would cast me these dagger looks that were so sharp they could literally shatter glass. For a long while I thankfully didn't have too much interaction with my brother's girlfriend, but my parents were going away for the weekend. They told my brother Franklin he was more than welcome to invite a handful of guests for a barbecue and a sleepover, which is exactly what he did. I also invited a couple of my own friends, and Franklin invited several university students. It was a great evening spent outside the entertainment area, next to the swimming pool, under the gazebo, drinking a plethora of white wine, spirits and beer. While my brother and his best friend Wayne took charge of barbecuing burgers, marinated chicken wings and hot dogs. There was music playing in the background. Some people appeared to be dancing on the lawn, gyrating their hips, singing happily to the music. I was in the kitchen with two of my friends buttering warm rolls, preparing potato and Greek salad. Who should walk into the kitchen looking as if she'd stepped out of a bandbox but Barbie herself? I must admit that she looked absolutely stunning. I'll give her that. She was wearing a shoestring black dress with slits on the side, along with some gold high-heel shoes. She made me feel very conscious of how drab I looked in my jeans and sweatshirt. I suddenly felt conspicuously underdressed, but this was a barbecue, wasn't it? No one was dressing up for the evening. She strutted around the kitchen like a peacock, throwing out its glorious plumage in a vaingloriousness that was indisputable. Then Barbie did the most unlikely thing. She threw her arms around me effusively, as if we were best friends, kissing both sides of my cheeks. "Oh, darling Lillian, it's so good to see you. Now, don't you look so pretty tonight? I love your hair," she said, playing with my blonde locks affectionately, although I hated it, as I have a huge issue with people touching my hair. I began to flush bright pink with embarrassment, momentarily rather seduced by Barbie's flattering words, secretly wondering why she was being so incredibly nice to me. I wasn't sure exactly how to react. Was this genuine, or was this just part of a duplicitous act? I wasn't entirely sure, but she seemed to have both of my friends fooled, or hoodwinked if you like. They both seemed to think she was quite delightful, as if a bedazzling butterfly had suddenly flown into the kitchen. They were transfixed. "Now, Lillian, are you going to introduce me to your two lovely friends here or not?" she said, looking at my two bemused friends, who seemed overawed by this glamorous woman. "Well, these are my two friends. This is Lottie, and this is Candace." "Hello, hello." Barbie threw her arms around them both, as if they were bosom buddies, kissing them on both cheeks affectionately. "Any friends of Lillian's are friends of mine always," she chided. "I want you all to have such a wonderful time tonight, all three of you. Feel free to mix with all of Franklin's friends. I'll send you over some amazing wine I got from the Willamite Valley. You'll just love it. It's top quality stuff." My two friends looked at me in bewilderment once she'd left. "I thought you said your brother's girlfriend was a complete dragon. But she's so nice. I think you've judged her far too severely." "You're probably right," I said. "I must have misjudged her." The evening started pleasantly. The music was good, as it had pleasing rhythmic vibe to it, and some of those old 80s hits made me just want to dance, not like the music nowadays, which is so inferior. I remember doing a lot of dancing. Barbie was true to her word. She came over to us, giving us some special wine that was of a high premium quality, obviously exceedingly expensive, very good to drink. It was absolutely delicious. But after a while it made me feel distinctly light-headed, queasy, terribly woozy. It was having a similar effect on my friends. The moment I started drinking, I started to see stars, became unstable and wobbly on my feet. It was like everything went hazy and blurred. I remember hearing my brother saying, "Oh dear, she's as drunk as a skunk. I think we should take her to bed." Then I just blacked out after that. The next thing I knew was that someone was poking me in the shoulders. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" I heard the male voice saying to me. "I want you to pay me now," he said. Where was I wondered. I looked around me. It was exceedingly dark outside. All I could see were towering tall trees, and they were flanked on either side of the road. An irate-looking taxi driver, wearing a scarlet turban on his head, appeared to be getting exceedingly frustrated with me. His face was scowling. His brown eyes looked indignant. "Where am I asked him. "You're in Washington State," he said. "Sorry? Where did you say I am?" I asked him. The man looked exceedingly frustrated with me. He looked infuriated. "Look, I bought you where you asked me to drop you off. You've been in my taxi for 8 hours now. I'd like my payment, please. It's in your pocket. I was told by your girlfriend." I fiddled around in the back pocket of my jeans. To my amazement, I found some paper notes tied together in an elastic band. I handed them over to him. I was in such a groggy state. Everything felt surreal. A large part of me really believed that this was a horrendous dream of which I would surely wake any time soon. The taxi driver started to count the money, with a satisfied smirk on his face. "I'm keeping the rest," he promptly told me, popping it into his wallet, which he put in his jacket. "I make it a general rule not to take drunks on long journeys, so I broke the rule tonight. Your friend was very persuasive about your urgency to get here, but I don't see your lift. I'm sure they'll be arriving to pick you up soon, but I can't wait for you. I've got to go." It was still dark outside, so being left in this rural environment was more than a little daunting for me, but I was having difficulty stringing my words together. "Excuse me, could you just explain yourself? What is actually going on here? I don't understand any of this. I'm very, very confused. What friend? What are you talking about? What lift?" The captious, umbrageous taxi driver looked exasperated. He shook his head belligerently, as if he'd put up with me for far too long, and had about as much of me he could possibly take. He'd seen enough drunks in his time. He liked to give them a wide berth. I watched in bemusement as he climbed into the front seat of his taxi, revving up the engine and driving away. I was so disorientated and confused. I began to walk around aimlessly, rather like a chicken without a head. I felt as if I wasn't grounded, as if my mind was floating above the trees, as if in some way I was disconnected to my body. I've never felt like this before, not even when I've had too much to drink. This had to be a dream, but why in the hell would I not wake up from it? If you've been under an anaesthetic from a heavy operation, you're trying to wake up through that foggy curtain of heaviness. You're trying to fight your way through to climb back to reality, but you're held back. That is exactly what it felt like. I couldn't bring my mind to a place of rational thought or constructive reasoning. I was like an inebriated drunk that had lost my ability to reason or even walk straight. But it was worse than that. It was as if my mind wasn't easily accessible. I was mindfully aware that someone must have drugged me. How was it possible that only moments ago I was at a barbecue in Boston? Then I drank some alcohol, and the next thing I knew was that I was being dumped in the middle of nowhere, without a cell phone, with only enough money for a taxi cab. I had now ended up in Washington State. I didn't even want to be here. Why was I here? I'd been so fast asleep for over 7 to 8 hours. I had been out for the count. I was still so drowsy. I mean, how the hell does that happen to anyone? I was so woozy, so out of things, so much so that I didn't feel any fear, or even react. It was like I was in my own delirious, drunken, highly intoxicated bubble. So I trudged along the side of the road, next to the trees that penciled up into the sky like viridescent giants. But given that it was still dark, they looked somewhat menacing. There was a cool breeze blowing through the trees, so their vertical silhouettes jiggled. Their boughs bobbed up and down, while the moonlight cast its silvery shadows over the asphalt road, upon which there were no cars that drove by. There was not a solitary soul in sight. I could hear the crickets, along with the sounds of the frogs, but I remember feeling so terribly alone, as if I was the only person in the entire world that was surrounded by hundreds of trees wherever I looked. I was feeling too foggy to continue walking any more, so I sat down for a while. I think I must have curled up into a fetal position on the earthen pavement and fallen into a deep sleep. I'm grateful that it wasn't cold or wet. I awoke up to find myself being scrutinized by 2 anomalous, substantially sized figures that were daunting and imposing. What was happening to me, I wondered. At first I was in Boston, then I was in Washington State. Now I was being eyeballed by 2 speculative, inquiring creatures. One had actually poked me to see if I would move. Was this all part of some nonsensical dream of which I was finally going to wake up? Was I inebriated and befuddled? Was I imagining these weird creatures? Had I eaten magic mushrooms or something? And was I having some nonsensical out-of-worldly experience? I studied the creatures through my bleary eyes, rubbing them a couple of times to make absolutely certain that I wasn't seeing things. It must have been early morning. I could hear the dawn chorus, see a soft light descending over the valley. As slowly but surely the grey sky began to subside, peeling away like a layer of dull paint to embrace a much lighter, more appealing colour. So the grey folded away, and a soft light enveloped the valley. The two curious creatures were scrutinising me through twinkling treacle-coloured brown eyes, filled with a solicitous concern. It was then, like a blinding revelation, that I realised exactly what they were. Oh, my word, they were Bigfoot. One was clearly female. She had long sagging breasts, low slung on her chest, rather like two big drooping empty sacks. She was tall, lanky, slender, with a muscular body, burly, powerful shoulders. But her face was so reassuring, her eyes so kind and tender. I knew I had nothing to fear. I could sense I was in the presence of two mighty, highly intelligent beasts, both of whom seemed benignant, empathic, benevolent, and tender-hearted towards me. The other Bigfoot I think must have been her youngling, for he was about 4 foot tall. They were both covered in long flowing hair, the colour of ash grey. Their faces were very human-like. They both had leathery grey skins, furrowed foreheads, high cheekbones, and very flat noses. For a second the female creature began to talk to the young creature. They talked backwards and forwards in a language that sounded very strange, engaging in an assiduous, impassioned conversation together, which I knew was all about me. Once again I felt that heady exhaustion overtake me. It was as if my head was filled with clouds of cotton wool. I just could not keep my eyes open, no matter how hard I tried. The next thing is I knew that I could feel myself being carried in powerful arms. I could sense I was travelling through the woods, but the tiredness I felt was all-consuming. I woke up at intervals during the day, to find myself in what I believe was a Bigfoot nursery. It was a square area, or clearing if you like, surrounded by trees. There appeared to be a large male standing in front of the trees like a centurion on guard duty. The female was in charge of watching over 4 little Bigfoot that were playing games together with stones and pine cones. There were moments when these younglings would walk over to me, watching me curiously through their incredible inquiring brown eyes, but the female Bigfoot would push them away and talk to them in an authoritative tone, as if she was reprimanding them, telling them to leave me alone, that I needed my sleep. I had waves of consciousness where I would watch the little Bigfoots interacting with each other, and waves when I would drift off to sleep again, as if I was floating on air. Why was I so incredibly tired, consumed by a compulsive, unrelenting, pathological fatigue that was relentless in its hold over me? But when darkness fell, I woke up to find myself alone, with just the female Bigfoot for company, who appeared to be keeping a steely eye on me. I really liked her. I stumbled to my feet, feeling this overwhelming need to violently hurl up the contents of my stomach. I quickly ran over to a bush. I threw up violently. My brow began to sweat profusely. I could taste this bitter taste of gall on my tongue. I vomited and vomited. I could feel the female creature patting my back. She kept talking to me in reassuring, audible words, as if she was trying to encourage me. It seemed like she was telling me I was going to be all right. After I vomited, I felt 1,000% better. The sluggish feeling I felt faded. The thumping headache I had had was vanquished. The nausea lifted. The overwhelming tiredness slipped away, as quickly as the sun does when it retires from a hard day's work. I stood up, looking at the Bigfoot. She towered above me, proud and tall, like a graceful, majestic, lofty tree. I felt like a tiny, inconspicuous insect by contrast to her. But she wrapped me in her undeniable warmth, rather like a blanket, in a congenial energy that was so compassionate, so loving, that I could completely surrender to her charge, knowing all would be well. I looked at her and spoke to her in English, hoping with all my heart that she would understand or comprehend exactly what I was saying. I need your help. I don't know where I am. Can you take me to a farmhouse of some kind, where there are people that can possibly help me?
I know it must sound crazy to you, but I'm in absolutely no doubt at all that this Bigfoot was telepathic. She was literally looking at my eyes as though she was reading my thoughts. Then I heard these words in my head. "I'll take you to where they're people." The creature lifted me in her arms, carrying me through the woodgrove, moving at a fast speed, gliding with a grace that meant not once did she jolt me. It seemed as if for her I was of no encumbrance, as if I was as light as a feather, as if my weight was of so little significance. Then I could see her leaving the tall, towering shade of the ponderosa pines and Douglas firs behind her, and moving through a meadow. Then I saw the silhouette of a farmhouse. Oh, how comforting that was! It grew larger and larger as we neared our approach. The creature then put me down at the farmhouse door. She glided away, but I sensed that she was still watching me from a distance. I was standing at a perfect stranger's door, where there were lights on inside this house. I could smell the fresh smell of hay, tack and leather in my nostrils. I knew there must be horses around. I could hear the sound of laughter and voices coming from the house. I knocked on the door. A woman opened it. She was beaming brightly at me. She was a plump woman in her 50s, wearing an apron over her jeans. "So who do we have here?" she asked me. "My name's Lillian," I explained. "Actually, I'm from Boston. I know it sounds crazy, but I woke up to find myself in Washington State. It's an awfully long story. But may I use your phone to make some phone calls? You see, I think I was drugged. I need my brother to come and pick me up." "Oh, you poor, poor thing. Please do come in. Have you eaten anything, dear?" "No, I haven't," I admitted, realised suddenly how hungry I actually was. I could smell the most delicious savoury aromas coming from her kitchen. "Well, why don't you come into the kitchen? Please have something to eat before you phone anyone." "Please don't gawk," she told her large family, who were all studying me curiously as they were eating dinner around a large wooden table. "This is Lillian. She's joining us for dinner." After I'd eaten, I phoned my brother in Boston.
"Lillian, is that you?" came my brother's alarmed voice. "Where the heck are you? Where did you get to?"
"I'm in Washington State."
"Where? What the hell?" came Franklin's voice. "How the hell did you get there?"
"I don't know. It's a weird story. A taxi dumped me here. The taxi claimed I'd asked to be lifted here. I had the money for the fare in the back pocket of my jeans, but I have no recollection of how I got here."
"That's very bizarre. You were inebriated last night. You were completely out for the count. How much did you have to drink, Lillian? I took you and your girlfriends to your bedroom at 8:30. Now that's early. Your girlfriends were zonked. They slept for 24 hours in your bedroom. It was like they were completely bladdered. They also got violently sick. They're now feeling much better. But we couldn't find sight or sound of you. We had no idea where you were."
"We didn't drink that much," I assured him. "These kind people say I can stay here as long as I need. But will you come and collect me as soon as possible?"
"Of course. I'm leaving right now. I'm going to take Dad's truck. I'll fill it with petrol and be on my merry way. Please pass the phone to the people so I can get their address from them."
It was when I returned to my home in Boston that me and my friends began to put the pieces of the enigmatic puzzle together. We soon realised that it was after Barbie had given us the wine that we had become unusually drunk. We realised that she must have spiked the drink with something that certainly had the capacity to completely knock us out. So what she put in that drink, God only knows. One of my brother's friends saw a drunken girl being placed into the back of a taxi, while a woman was talking to the taxi driver, telling them that the girl needed to go to Washington State as soon as possible. And she wrote down the details of the address for the driver, claiming that I was going to be picked up in that remote location by friends. I realised the syrupy sweet Barbie had turned on the charm to me and my friends with guileful intent, so that we would be unguarded and swept away by her charm, obliviously unaware that she had ensnared us in her trap. As I remember her saying to me, "Be very careful of who your enemies are." I remember that very, very clearly. My best friend Lottie was telling her mother what had happened. Her mother went as white as a sheet, the colour draining from her face. "Are you all right, Lottie?" my friend had asked her mother, who is a child psychologist working with seriously sick children who have mental issues, some that have the propensity for great violence, and very bizarre, absurd behaviours. "Did you say Barbie? Is her name Barbara?" she asked Lottie. "Barbara Mackenzie?" "I'm not sure," said Lottie. "I have no idea what her surname is, but I know she calls herself Barbie. I've got a photograph of her that I took on the evening of the party," she said, showing her mother the picture on her cell phone of Barbie lifting up her glass of wine in a toast with an animated expression on her face. Her mother examined the picture closely. Her face went whiter than chalk, if that was possible. She said, "Oh my God, it's her!" "Who, Mum? Who is she?" asked Lottie, looking alarmed. "Was she one of your patients?" Her mother nodded. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the case with you, due to patient confidentiality, but as this is your best friend Lillian we're talking about, I would tell her to watch her back if I was you. This girl, let's just say, is not someone you want to hang around with. Growing up, there were some nefarious things that happened around her childhood that many think she was responsible for. But of course there was no evidence, but let's just say the indicators definitely suggested that she was possibly involved. It was a very dark, gruesome state of affairs. I cannot divulge them to you. I wouldn't even if I could, because let's just say they were horrific. Do you think she could have paid a taxi driver to drop Lillian off in the middle of nowhere? In Washington State?" asked Lottie. "Oh, I think so. I really do. But as I say, I can't discuss the case. But let's just say, tell Lillian and her brother that they need to watch their backs. Don't get involved with her in any way. I've already said too much. I could get struck off, but I can't sit back and say nothing." When Lottie told me all this, I called my brother and told him I believed his girlfriend was responsible for sending me in a taxi all the way to Washington State. She was the one who lightly drugged us. Believe it or not, when my brother challenged her, she actually admitted to it. "All right, I did it," she told him, "but only because your sister was interfering in our relationship, trying to break us up. She's never liked me. I had to teach her a valuable lesson. She needs to know that you don't put your nose in other people's business." "So you think it's okay for you to go drugging my sister and her friends, getting her to be dropped in the middle of nowhere, miles away from home, in a strange place?" "Come on, it's no big deal, Franklin. She got help, didn't she? She got home safe and well. There's no harm done." "No harm done? What are you smoking, Barbie? That's not the point, is it? You knew I was worried sick when my sister went missing, but did you say anything? No, you didn't. You kept your mouth shut while I was tearing my hair out, wondering where my sister was, whether I should report her missing to the police. I was worried sick about her because she was drugged. Her condition was bad. All the time you knew exactly where she was. I had to get into my truck to drive over 7.5 hours to pick her up. You think there was no harm done? My sister was dropped off in the middle of a heavily wooded area at night in an intoxicated state because you put something in her wine. She was vulnerable, a sitting duck for a mountain lion or some predatory animal to take advantage of her. Who are you, Barbie? I thought I knew you, but I can see that I don't. You're sick in the head. As far as I'm concerned, I want nothing more to do with you. Our relationship is finished. You're pathetic. Your whole family is, piped Barbie, storming off. And that was the last my family ever saw of her. I was surprised she didn't pull more stunts on my brother, but thankfully she left us well alone. I chose not to tell my brother she'd been receiving treatments for mental issues. My brother didn't need to know about that. I think he already realised she wasn't right in the head. As for the Bigfoot, that helped me. Truly, I do not know what I would have done without her intervention. She helped me get out of a right mess, watched over me in my delirious state. So for that, I am eternally grateful. I am glad to tell you that my brother is now happily married to a delightful woman called Susan. The name Barbie Mackenzie has never crossed the threshold of our home ever again. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Helen Greensborough may have been one of the best actresses at St. Clair's private school for girls, but her acting abilities were sorely wanting this late afternoon, when she failed to hide her extreme frustration that Mrs. Paisley, her drama teacher, had failed to turn up for rehearsals, which was extremely unusual for the reasonably prudent teacher, that although was not known for her punctuality, In 20 long years she had never once failed to show up for a rehearsal at St. Clair's. Well, not until now, of course. Helen could not help but feel a tad annoyed. A downward scowl appeared on her pretty face that made her look rather like a belligerent, disgruntled bull terrier. It was amazing how a miserable expression could so easily sour a pretty face. Helen could look quite angelic at times, well, when she wanted to, of course, with her gleaming dark raven hair, fair porcelain skin, and very expressive green eyes. But this afternoon she looked anything but. All she could ponder was what was keeping the larger-than-life, vibrant Mrs. Paisley, who was a bosomous, buxom woman, with breasts that she herself had described as being capable of sinking the Titanic, as they were so incredibly large, making the woman rather top-heavy. "I'd never have drowned in the Titanic," she would joke to her pupils. "Look at me, and these gargantuan breasts of mine. They're like two buoyant flotation tanks, aren't they? They would have prevented me from sinking in the Titanic. Too bad the cold would have done me in. At least then I would have been able to say that my breasts had some redeeming purposes after all. These wretched things," she complained. "They're the bane of my life, they really are. Who the hell ever said that breasts were sexy? Big ones, I mean. They should try a pair on for size, and they'd soon change their minds about that pretty fast, let me tell you. I wanted to get them reduced, you know. A long time ago I did. But I guess I'm stuck with them for the foreseeable future. They're not going anywhere. They do give me the most dreadful backache and weigh me down at the end of a hard day, you know. I was even booked in for surgery, was all prepped up for the procedure. But I bolted out of the hospital so fast, like a terrified little rabbit. I saw those surgeons as almost predatory, as if they couldn't wait to get their grisly knives into me and start cutting me up into tiny little pieces. Everyone was looking for me, you know. I just couldn't go through with it. I really couldn't. I actually ran away to a bar 2 hours outside of Seattle, and I'm afraid to say I got horribly drunk, drowning my sorrows. My husband found me in a right old state, he did. You do hear stories, don't you, about things going dreadfully wrong with surgeries. I was so convinced that the surgery was either going to leave me permanently disfigured for the rest of my life, with dreadful scars all over my chest, or invariably I would die on the operating table. I could see it so clearly in my mind's eye. The surgeons panicking as they tried to resuscitate my flagging body, and me being hurriedly transported to the morgue with a sheet over my body. I know what you're thinking. Maybe it's the drama queen in me, and it probably is. But then again, there's been a lot of cases, you know, of people having punctured lungs during liposuction procedures and stuff like that, meaning some people never ever wake up from their operations. I've done my research on the matter, you know. They keep this cleverly covered up, as the cosmetic surgery business is worth billions and billions of dollars, and it doesn't do to advertise all the blunders they make, of which there are so many, too many to count. People die under the knife, you know, all the time. It's a lot more common than you think. Unfortunately, things can go horrifically wrong, even when you're in the best of hands, from allergic reactions to the anesthesia, and so many other things that you never even consider. You must remember, to our body when we're having surgery, it has to recover from a major trauma, as if we've been run over by a bus. The body doesn't know any different, does it? So when we've been through a mince grinder, so to speak, it's going to have very grave health implications on us long term. It's a brave, or maybe a foolish person that goes under the knife, if you ask me. My husband was glad I never went through with the procedures. Turns out he had similar views to my own, and similar fears, so to speak. Over the years, I've learnt to trust my instincts. I knew in my gut that having surgery of any kind was a monumental mistake for me. I guess I'm stuck with these good-for-nothing breasts long term, But I'd rather have these than be pushing up the daisies at my tombstone, believe me. It would seem, despite her voluptuous proportions, Mrs. Paisley was unnaturally graceful and light on her feet, for a woman that was so top-heavy, almost as if in her former life she'd been a ballet dancer of some kind. She would elegantly float into rehearsals, swathed in an opulent cloud of floral notes that she wore on her person so elegantly, like another layer of clothing. Mrs. Paisley never ever wore cheap synthetic fragrances that would make you violently wheeze or cough, but a pleasing bouquet of natural floral notes that reminded you of a wildflower meadow. Furthermore, she dressed in ethereal, bright, colourful, bohemian-looking clothes that floated on her body, as if the gossamer fabric itself was being blown in a soft, gentle breeze. "I like clothes that move with the body," she told her students, "not clothes that tuck me in so tightly, so that I feel like I'm wearing a corset. I like clothes that breathe naturally on my skin." She'd often wear unusual artistic necklaces that always made a statement, along with striking long dangling earrings that always invited great interest. Everybody wanted to know where she'd brought the unusual eye-catching jewellery. Mrs. Paisley's pieces of jewellery came from all parts of the globe, from some of the most curious places that she'd visited, like open markets in Bangladesh, a little alcove in Florence, Italy, or a tiny antique shop in Cornwall, England. The much-beloved drama teacher had become like a familiar fixture and fitting at St. Clair's for over 20 years. She was the most favoured teacher the school had ever known. Everybody loved her. She masterfully taught French, English composition and drama with an impassioned dedication and eager enthusiasm that was so incredibly infectious the pupils had naturally responded by producing effortlessly easy high grades. Everybody unanimously believed this was a reflection of Mrs. Paisley's idiosyncratic teaching skills that were far from conventional. Mrs. Paisley never followed the book on how you were expected to teach your pupils. She did things exclusively her own way. Indeed, in Mrs. Paisley's classes, no pupil had ever failed any of her subjects, which was a testament to her remarkable teaching abilities, which had been recognised and appreciated by the school's head, Mrs. Dickinson, who had described her star teacher as one of a kind. Even those pupils a little slow to learning had surprised their own parents by their astonishing good grades, seen only in the classes that were taught exclusively by Mrs. Paisley. "You mark my words," Mrs. Dickinson was proudly known to have said about Mrs. Paisley, whom was naturally her all-time favourite teacher at St. Clair's. "They broke the mould when they made that woman, you know. If more teachers were exactly like her, the pupils would be leaving school with first-class honours, without even trying. Some teachers, you know, are like master gardeners. They know how to tweak a plant, prune it, make it grow, almost as if they've got green fingers. Likewise, Mrs. Paisley brings out the blossoms on her students. They flourish under her instruction. She turns a demure little shrub into a showy display of flowery blooms. Too bad I can't make duplicate copies of her. Believe me, I would have her teaching in every classroom at St. Clair's, and we'd have the highest success rate of any school in the borough." Mrs. Paisley had a natural acumen for stringing words together. She had successfully published 2 books of fiction, which was why it was promptly decided that English composition should be conducted with Mrs. Paisley at the helm, so that she could help her students learn to express themselves better through the power of the written word. Who better to teach you how to write than an author herself? It was also the reason why she'd personally written her own interpretation of the school play that was soon to be shown in front of a live audience. The play was Murder on the Orient Express, with Hercule Poirot, the leading character being played by Helen Greensborough herself. The illustrious Mrs. Paisley had a bubbly personality, a great dry sense of humour that was contagious. You couldn't help but love her. She successfully made the mediocre predictability of school life, with its structured routines and strict disciplines, infinitely more palatable for all the pupils at St. Clair's. Helen Greensborough had often thought that for her years at school would have been a lot more enjoyable if the teachers had been as fun as Mrs. Paisley was. as her winning, gregarious personality would always make you laugh, complemented by her impassioned, dramatic gestures and changeable facial expressions that were always endearingly comical. Some of the staff at the school were very formidable, especially Mr. Longstock, who taught science, and when you entered his classroom, it always felt like a morgue in there. His long-suffering lessons were delivered in a repetitive, uninspiring wooden drawl that was so incredibly dull that Helen had struggled to keep her eyes open during class, and as a consequence her science grades were quite appalling, which had not best pleased her father.
"It doesn't make any sense, Helen. You get straight A's for English and French, but you get an E for science. This is an absolute joke. No daughter of mine should be getting grades this low. It's an embarrassment to me, love. You're going to have to pull your socks up."
"But, Dad," she would explain, "Mr. Longstock is so incredibly boring. You have no idea. It's hard to remember anything he teaches. His lessons just go on and on. You feel as if there's no end to them."
"That's no excuse, love," he would say indignantly. "You need to concentrate in your class, and especially if the teacher is boring, then you need to pay even more attention. I'm paying very good money for that private school you're going to. The very least you can do in the circumstances is to pay attention during class. The truth be told, Helen, I think you are being bone idle. You've decided you don't like science, so you're not even going to bother to try in class."
"Dad, that's not true. You don't understand. I challenge you to sit through one of Mr. Longstock's lessons, and then you'd understand how I feel." Helen knew it wasn't the science that was the problem. It was the uninspiring way the subject was being taught, but her father never understood what she was going on about. He thought she was talking absolute nonsense. Then there was math, which was a subject Helen despised with a burning passion. The Irish teacher who taught math, Mrs. Carbuncle, was as shrewd as a hawk, and was known by her pupils as the giraffe. She was incredibly tall for a woman measuring 6'2", with legs that appeared to go on for ever and ever. When she appeared in assembly for morning prayers, she towered over all the other teachers, making them all look like little midgets, which Helen always found decidedly funny. For some reason, Mrs. Carbuncle religiously pounced on Helen during classes. It wasn't as if she stood out, so Helen couldn't figure out why she was always picked on. She didn't wear thick glasses, nor did she have bright orange hair, nor was she a roly-poly that rolled into class like a sizable beach ball. But for some reason Mrs. Carbuncle could smell her insouciance like a cadaver dog might smell a corpse, so that Helen would be dragged to the front of the classroom in a moment of humiliation that was so conspicuous that would make her wish the floor would swallow her whole. Mrs. Carbuncle would make her complete the math equation in front of the entire class that she had drawn up on the blackboard. It would seem Helen was always kept on her toes in math, and thankfully, due to Mrs. Carbuncle's shrewd, no-nonsense approach to teaching, Helen's math grades had fared reasonably well, unlike the train wreck of her science grades. Helen's whole world revolved around drama. She dreamed of becoming an actress one day. So with Mrs. Paisley being 20 minutes late for the rehearsal, it was beginning to irk her considerably, as her drama teacher had never once let her pupils down. Well, not until now, that is. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon at St. Clair's. The lobby cleared of all students and teachers, rather like a beach after a tsunami has hit. Most of the pupils had long since left the school, that finished at 2:10 promptly every day. The corridor was sequestered and lonely, deprived of the cheerful banter of the pupils that were usually armed to the nines with books, navigating their way through the corridors of St. Clair's, to get from one classroom to the next in a hum of idle chatter. The bashfully reticent son was eager to make a quick retreat, rather like the long-suffering students had done, leaving the school premises after a long, hard day. It was ominously silent at St. Clair's, and the only signs of any active life were located in the school hall, where the gathering of eager drama students flocked together like a cluster of geese for their rehearsal of the school play. Helen Greensborough was concerned about her role as the esteemed famous Belgian detective Hercule Poirot, in their rendition of Murder on the Orient Express. She still hadn't grasped the Belgium accent yet, but Mrs. Paisley was helping her brush up her act to get her accent as close to perfect as she possibly could. But it was quite a laborious struggle to get it exactly right. Luckily Mrs. Paisley was fluent at French, and her help in assisting Helen with her accent had been invaluable. Helen admitted that when she appeared on stage, wearing a top hat along with a distinguished moustache that was a signature prerequisite of the esteemed Belgium detective, she began to feel like she really had morphed into the lovable character with his shrewd dark brown eyes and very discerning disposition. She was thoroughly enjoying playing a male role for a change. Previously most of her parts had been female, so playing a man was a whole new challenge for her. In the beginning she'd struggled to deepen her voice, but she'd been working on it, even though she thought she sounded a little squeaky at times, rather like an old scratchy record being played over and over again. Often when she tried to lower her voice, she'd suddenly start to cough and splutter, as her throat would tickle so much. But she had found drinking warm honey and lemon before rehearsals had made those unfortunate side effects lessen dramatically, and her voice was beginning to sound a whole lot smoother of late. Mrs. Paisley had told her that she had initially moved like a flamingo on stage, that she needed to walk with due purpose, with a high-standing deportment like the detective would have done. You must remember Hercule Poirot was a haughty, stuck-up man. He was very proud, you know. He didn't suffer fools gladly. I want you to walk on that stage, Helen, like a pompous, self-assured man who owns the stage, commands the attention and respect of the entire audience. Don't you dare pussyfoot around, Helen, as if you don't know your left leg from your right. You must remember there is no hesitancy, no reluctant insecurity with a man like Hercule Poirot, who is very self-assured. When he speaks, everybody needs to pay attention to his words. He's an old-fashioned sleuth, one of those annoyingly perceptive people that can read between the lines. He's as sharp as an eagle-eyed hawk, very, very observant. I want the audience out there to go completely quiet the moment you walk out on stage, Helen. You must command a stage presence, like the kind of person that everybody notices the moment they enter the room. Do you understand what I'm saying, Helen? If anybody can pull this off, my love, it's you, which is why I chose you specifically for the part. You were made to be on stage, Helen, and I want your light to shine. Do you understand? Yes, Mrs. Paisley, she had said. Regretfully, there were only 2 weeks left for Helen to polish up her performance, and playing the part of the Belgium detective was going to be challenging. But Helen loved challenges. The play would be shown to an audience of both parents and pupils alike, and Helen wanted to wow the audience with her unwavering star quality that had made her become a favoured pupil of Mrs. Paisley's over the last couple of years, when Mrs. Paisley had marvelled at the promise of her aspiring pupil. Helen knew she was talented when it came to acting, but there was still room for improvement, no matter how good you were. Mrs. Paisley would help her sharpen her performance, and Helen had been looking forward to the rehearsal all day. The day had dragged on so slowly, at an agonizing, reluctant, sloth-like pace, with the usual boring subjects to while away the long, insufferable hours. And now that she was in the school hall at St. Clair's, eagerly waiting for Mrs. Paisley to finally make her appearance, it seemed like this inauspicious day appeared to be growing significantly longer and longer and longer, rather like a never-ending elastic band that stretches out to twice its size and appears to have no end or beginning. It didn't help, of course, that the sky had become decidedly more gloomy, as if the afternoon was about to invite some rain. Indeed, all the drama pupils were likely feeling rather down in the dumps. They were waiting impatiently in the school hall, sitting in the chairs opposite the stage, with their faces turned towards the open door that overlooked the long, sweeping but empty corridor. Much like Helen, they were hoping Mrs. Paisley would help them tweak their acting skills before the big day, when they all hoped that their lights, that they had kept under a bushel for so long would shine before the entire school, so their audience would be dazzled by their winning performances. This would be unlikely to happen if Mrs. Paisley didn't help them refine their acting skills, with a nip here and a tuck there, rather like a skilled seamstress, determined to make the dress worn on that special day absolutely perfect. What on earth had happened to their drama teacher? She should have been here over 20 long minutes ago. The time was marching away steadily and dissipating as fast as the smoke from a chimney. The drama students kept anxiously glancing at the door, watching, waiting and hoping for any promising signs of movement in the school corridor. But still Mrs. Paisley had not graced them with her presence. Where the hell was she? Were the thoughts that danced from one pupil to the next. But for a long time no one articulated their growing concerns, until Helen broke the sombre mood by saying what everybody else was so obviously thinking. "There's something going on here," said Helen, rather soberly to her fellow drama students. "You know Mrs. Paisley as well as I do. She's never been this late before, has she? I know she's not precisely punctual, but she's never late either. Do you think something's wrong? I'm really worried about her, and I'm also worried about our play. It's going to be presented in 2 weeks' time. We're running out of time." "Maybe she's got waylaid," said Sandra, shrugging her shoulders nonchalantly. "I mean, is it a big deal if she's late for once in a lifetime? I'm sure she's absolutely fine." But even Sandra did not look convinced by the words she uttered, that failed to match the disquiet in her eyes. "It is a big deal," said Elsa. "A very big deal, if you must know. Do you realise, guys, there's only 2 weeks left until we perform in front of the entire school and our parents. And I don't know about you, but I, for one, don't want our play to be a disaster. There's no doubt in my mind that if we don't rehearse our lines, it will be a significant setback for the all of us. There's plenty of room for improvement in our individual roles to this play. I'm sorry, but there is. I hate stating the blindingly obvious. It's such a bummer, isn't it, that Mrs. Paisley's not here yet? I can't believe this is happening to us, as we're running out of time, and I'm beginning to panic a little. I'm still not feeling entirely confident about my performance yet. I hate to say this, but Elsa's absolutely right. I mean, even missing one rehearsal is a distinct disadvantage for us. It's a short countdown to the play. Before you know it, we'll actually be up there on that stage, in front of a live audience. And I, for one, want our performance to be better than good. Mrs. Paisley herself was only saying yesterday that she was reasonably worried that we didn't have enough time left to nip the play into shape, to get it exactly right. I've been worried about that myself. It's like the time has just been swallowed up, like the sands in an hourglass. I'm personally rather concerned about my Belgium accent. I need to pull off the character of Hercule Poirot with such a conviction that everybody in that entire audience doesn't doubt for a single second that I am indeed the esteemed detective Hercule Poirot himself. I feel a little uncertain about a few of my lines that I want Mrs. Paisley to help me with, but her not being here is so frustrating. Let's not kid. It's frustrating for all of us. I don't think any of us are remotely worried about you, said Elsa, unable to hide the scoff on her face. You know very well, Helen, that your performance of Hercule Poirot has been brilliant to date. Don't even try to deny it. You're outstandingly talented, and you know it. The rest of us need help, not you. As for your Belgium accent, I think it's perfect. I'm the one that's got to sound posh in my part, and I'm really struggling with that. I'm supposed to be a frivolous, stinking rich woman. I've got to speak as if I've got a plum in my mouth, and honestly I'm finding my part a little daunting, as nothing about me in my real life is remotely posh. Even my mother says my table manners are very sloppy. You're being hard on yourself, Elsa, said Helen encouragingly. Too self-critical, if you ask me. That's your problem. The best way to get into a character is to become that person. That's what I find. It's like playing dress rehearsal. You shed your current personality as if it's an old layer of clothes that no longer serves you, and then you become a brand new person, the person you're pretending to be. You need to believe, Elsa, that you're a stuck-up snob with a superior, precocious, vainglorious attitude who believes she's better than anybody else. You become her, and once you really believe you are her, your character will then become believable. It's so easy for you to say, Helen, said Elsa, but you just slip into your part so easily. The rest of us have to work at it, and I mean really work at it. Don't complain, Elsa. Listen to yourself. I'd give anything to get the grades you get in science, and you aren't half bad on the sports field either, said Helen, pausing for a moment, as concern dappled her face when she glanced down at the time on her cell phone. This is getting ridiculous. I'm sorry, guys, but it is. I've never known Mrs. Paisley to be this late. Do you think we should call her and tell her we've been waiting for 20 minutes? Isn't that a bit rude? Asked Sandra. I mean, she's running late. That's hardly a criminal offence, is it? I, for one, don't want to embarrass her and make her feel really bad. Mrs. Paisley's such a lovely lady. I don't think we should offend her like that. This isn't about making anyone feel bad, least of all Mrs. Paisley, said Helen circumspectly. But don't you see, it's so unlike her not to turn up for rehearsals. In truth, I suspect she's probably more passionate about getting the play into shape than we actually are. I mean, if we succeed, it always throws her in a good light, doesn't it? As a drama teacher, I mean. She's got an excellent reputation here at St. Clair's, and I'm sure she wants to keep it that way, does she not? She's invested in our performances as much as we are, probably more so. All the drama pupils exchanged worried glances between themselves, as if they felt as if they were stuck between a rock and a hard place, as to know what to do about their missing drama teacher. It would be embarrassing to make a sizable fuss, especially if the woman suddenly turned up, looking apologetic for holding everybody up. There were all kinds of reasons the woman could be late. She might have been held up in traffic. She might have to do something she wasn't expecting, like visiting a family friend who had suddenly taken ill. Or she might have had an accident, and that was a thought that nobody wanted to entertain. For school life without Mrs. Paisley just didn't bear thinking about. Look, said Sandra gingerly. I think we should wait a little bit longer. We should give it about half an hour to 45 minutes before we call her. I still think something came up for her. That's why she hasn't been able to get in touch. People can get into all kinds of pickles, can't they? I remember 2 years ago my dad never came home for several hours. My mother began to panic. No one knew where he was. It turned out his sister Patricia had a stroke, and he was running around after her like a hen without a head. He was in such a state that he never even bothered to phone my mother. He clean forgot, until he calmed down. So he was caught up in the moment, I suspect, and then his cell phone was off. Maybe something like that happened to Mrs. Paisley. That's all I'm saying. Well, you're probably right, said Elsa. I think we should do something, don't you? We should take the initiative and practice our own lines without Mrs. Paisley around. We could act our parts on stage like we would if Mrs. Paisley were actually here. Maybe, Helen, you can be Mrs. Paisley. You'd be a fabulous director. You can watch our performances. You can guide us through our lines. Tell us where we're going wrong. You can deny it all you like, Helen, but none of us are remotely worried about your performance. You're the one nobody has to worry about. You're going to rock up there on stage. The rest of us need your help, and I think you can show us what you would do if you were playing our parts, so that we can appear more professional. That's not a bad idea, Helen agreed. I'll be happy to help if I can. I've always rather fancied myself as a director, so there's no time like the present. I'll do it. Before long, the drama students were playing their parts on the school stage, and Helen was doing an excellent job in helping them tweak their performances. She decided she quite fancied being a director. It was almost as fun as acting out a part. Almost, not quite. Elsa, if you don't mind my saying so, You've walked onto the stage like a timid church mouse, she said, shaking her head vigorously. I'm sorry, but that is never ever going to work. It's like you're apologizing for even existing. I told you you need to step into the part. Remember, you're an entitled woman. You've had everything money could possibly buy you all your life. You're spoiled, precocious, self-centered, privileged, and used to getting anything you want at a drop of a hat. In short, you're not a terribly nice person. When you tweak your fingers, everybody comes running to you. You want the audience not to like you at all. You don't want to gain any favour from them. They are going to love disliking you. That's the whole point of your character. You're horrible. Don't forget that. You are supposed to look down on Mr. Hercule Poirot. You think of him as a silly detective who you don't hold in very high regard. He, on the other hand, which is me, will think you're a bit ditzy and outrageously over the top, that you're a silly woman. You know you can't behave bashful like you're doing now. It's not the part, it's not the character you're playing. You need to come onto the stage, own the space with a confident grandeur. You need to wave your arms around nonchalantly in the air, as if everything about this moment is centered completely around you and nothing else matters. You mean like this? Said Elsa, strutting onto the stage and oscillating her arms around with an ethereal grace and lifting up her head in a superior angle that suggested she thought everybody else in her midst was just simply pond life. That's perfect, Elsa. So much better. I can't tell you the difference. Remember, you need to carry off that haughty, superior attitude. You want to make Hercule Poirot think you're an airhead with tons of money and absolutely no brains. And the audience is going to feel much the same about you. They're going to love hating you. That's the whole idea. Goodness gracious me, said Helen, briefly glancing down at her cell phone. Can you believe it? We've been doing this for an hour and a half. And Mrs. Paisley still hasn't shown up yet. The time has disappeared this afternoon. I don't know where it went to. I think I'm going to call her, said Helen. This time she was determined to take the bull by the horns and stab Mrs. Paisley's number on her cell phone before she could change her mind, or any of the other drama students had time to dissuade her from taking such an initiative. What's wrong? Asked Sandra as Helen made a frustrated grimace. It just goes straight to voicemail, she told her. Mrs. Paisley's not answering her cell. I think I'll phone Mr. Paisley. I know he works from home. I've actually got his cell phone number, as he and my father regularly play bridge together. What's wrong? Asked Sandra. Why are you grimacing, Helen? Are you not getting through to Mrs. Paisley? No, I'm not. It goes straight to voicemail. It's so annoying. Mrs. Paisley's not answering. I think I'd better phone Mr. Paisley instead. I know he works from home. I've actually got his cell phone number, as he and my father regularly play bridge together. They know each other quite well. Everybody waited in abject silence as Helen phoned Mr. Paisley's number. It was almost as if they were holding their breath, waiting to hear if Mr. Paisley could shed any light on the enigmatic mystery of his wife's inexplicable disappearance.
Ralph Paisley speaking. How can I help you?
Came a rich male voice at the end of the line. Hello, Mr. Paisley. This is Helen Greensborough speaking. I'm Reginald Greensborough's daughter. You play bridge with my father. Your wife teaches me drama at St. Clair's. I'm the one playing the part of Hercule Poirot. I don't know if she told you about me. You know, the famous Belgian detective.
Oh, yes, Helen. I do remember you very well, as it happens. My wife talks most favourably about you. She says you're her most promising pupil, and a very talented actress too. Shouldn't you be doing a rehearsal with her right now and the other students at St. Clair's in the school hall? I know my wife is concerned that you only have 2 weeks left before you play Murder on the Orient Express on the school stage to a public audience. I'm definitely coming to see that, you know. It's one of my favourite dramas. Sorry, I'm getting carried away. What is this phone call about, Helen? How can I help you?
Well, it's about your wife, Mr. Paisley. She never turned up for the rehearsal today at school. We thought she was running late, so we rehearsed on our own. We waited for her to arrive, but she never came. One of the girls went out back to the parking lot to look for her white Toyota, or whatever you call that car, with the bear sticker on it that says I love all things sweet because I'm honey. The sticker was given to her by Julia Jarvis. It makes your wife's car very conspicuous. Besides, she usually always parks under the old oak tree every single day. People consider that her exclusive parking space. But her car was nowhere to be seen. So I don't even think she arrived at St. Clair's. I'm worried about her, Mr. Paisley. She's not with you by any chance? Or you don't happen to know where she could be? We're just all worried about her. She's our favourite teacher. We'd hate for anything untoward to have happened to her. She's never ever missed one of her rehearsals before. She'd normally tell us in advance if she wasn't going to make it. There was a long, uncomfortable pause at the end of the line, and Mr. Paisley cleared his throat uncomfortably.
Are you absolutely sure? My wife's car is not in the parking bay at St. Clair's. May she not have parked somewhere else, perhaps? Maybe somebody else parked under the oak tree where she normally parks, and my wife had to park somewhere else.
Absolutely sure, Mr. Paisley. I know her car well enough. It's very easy to spot. Very distinctive it is. Furthermore, everyone left school a long time ago at 2:10 in the afternoon. So if your wife were here, her car would likely be the only one there, unless one of our parents arrived to pick us up from drama early, which never ever happens, as our classes tend to go on for longer than anticipated.
So she's not there at your rehearsal?
Helen let out a sigh. How many times did she have to assure this man his wife's car was not on the school grounds? I'm afraid not, Mr. Paisley. Regretfully, she never pitched at all. We're naturally very concerned about her welfare. I mean, as I was saying, your wife's never failed to show up for class before. This is out of character for her. I'm sure you will agree with that.
I will agree with you there, young lady. That is most strange, said Mr. Paisley. My wife would never willingly fail to turn up for one of your rehearsals, so I cannot think why she's so obviously waylaid.
You don't think she could have had an accident, Mr. Paisley? Should we not phone the hospitals to ask if anyone meeting your wife's description has been taken in ill, or has been brought into a hospital due to an accident? I don't want to alarm you, Mr. Paisley, I really don't, but I'm trying to think outside of the box here. Some of the scenarios I'm envisaging aren't good, I'm afraid. The last thing I want to do is cause you undue panic. But I'm so concerned about your wife, Mr. Paisley.
Helen, I really appreciate your concern. But with the greatest of respect, it's way too early to call the hospitals like you are suggesting I should do. You don't do that kind of thing unless you're certain someone is really missing. It's too early to even consider my wife as a missing person. If my wife had an accident, her identification would be on her person. I would have already been notified by the police. But I'm sure that it's all just a storm in the teacup that will blow over in any moment. Just you watch this space, Helen. My wife will be walking through that door with a big smile on her face, wondering what all the fuss was about. She possibly clean forgot about the rehearsal. Believe it or not, despite what you may think, my wife has been known from time to time to be a tad absent-minded.
You do surprise me saying that. Your wife always strikes me as a rather prudent woman. But I hope you're right, Mr. Paisley. I don't want to be a wet blanket, but I feel rather uneasy about this whole business. I just hope that your wife is all right. If you need to contact me, just call me back on this number. I'd be very grateful if you could keep me posted and updated. I can't relax until I know your wife's safe. Besides, everyone in drama is so worried about her. I need to let them know that she's safe and well.
I am most sure, Helen, that my wife is safe and well. But I assure you, I will be in touch with you as soon as the silly minx walks through the front door, obliviously unaware of how much angst she's caused to the all of us. Thank you for phoning me, Helen. I appreciate it very much. And I must apologize on my wife's behalf that she never made it to rehearsals today. But I'm sure she had good reason for not showing up.
There's no need to apologise for that, Mr. Paisley. All I care about is that your wife is all right. Reginald Paisley's daughter had been casually languishing on their sumptuously cosy couch in the family living room, watching a television programme about the migratory routes of the whale species, when her father had taken the call from Helen Greensborough. Charlotte Paisley wanted to become a marine biologist one day. She was in her final year at St. Clair's School for Girls. She paused the remote control on the television and stared up at her father, for she had caught the wispy tail end of his conversation. Her ears were wagging. It was through dark, earnest eyes that she asked him gingerly, "Dad, what was that about? Were you speaking to Helen Greensborough from school?" She furrowed her brow, looking up at her father incredulously, as if she wanted to be assured that what she thought she'd heard was just a misunderstanding. It had to be, surely. "Dad, why did Helen Greensborough phone you? What's going on? Is Mum all right? What's all this stuff about phoning the hospitals? Nothing bad's happened to her, has it?"
"Don't you worry about your mum. I'm sure she's absolutely fine," said Mr. Paisley, clearing his throat. His dark brown eyes looked troubled. "Look, Charlotte, I don't know what to say to you. I'm not exactly sure where your mother is right now. Yes, that was Helen Greensborough on the phone. She was saying your mother never turned up for drama rehearsal at school. Her white Toyota was not parked in her usual shaded spot under the oak tree, or anywhere else for that matter in the parking bay. I gather it was totally empty. It seems your mother never arrived at the school for rehearsals, and she's not here, so I haven't got the first clue where in the world she is."
"Dad, that's terrible," said Charlotte, wrinkling up her face in an expression of grave disquiet. "Mum would never not turn up for rehearsal at school. You know how important the rehearsals are to her, especially with a deadline around the very next corner. I mean, the play is in 2 weeks' time. Dad, we have to phone the police at once. Something bad's happened to her. I can feel it in my bones. I don't feel good about this."
"For goodness sake, Charlotte, calm down, will you? We are not phoning the police, for goodness sake. Please don't overreact. Your mother has not even been gone for 24 hours. The police wouldn't even take us seriously if we went into the station to file a missing persons report. It's far too early to go down that route. Besides, your mother is an independent adult who's entitled to do her own thing. That's the way it is, I'm afraid, according to the law."
"But that's ridiculous. Mum is missing."
"We don't know that for sure, love. There may be all manner of reasons why your mother may not have turned up for her rehearsals today."
Charlotte looked at her father scathingly, with her defiant hands now parked on her hips. "Dad, name one of those so-called reasons you're talking about. Why wouldn't Mum turn up for her rehearsals? Don't you get it, Dad? Mum's clearly in trouble. She could have been abducted, even kidnapped. She could be in an accident of some kind. She could have had a heart attack or a stroke. Anything could have happened to her. Mum needs us, Dad. We've got to find her. If the police won't do anything, then we've got to find her."
"Goodness gracious me, Charlotte. Your mother's only been missing for a few hours, and you're envisaging the worst-case scenario. Imagine how silly you're going to feel if she walks through that door right now, which I have to tell you is a very distinct possibility."
"But, Dad, don't you get it? This is the age of cell phones, isn't it? We tend to use them when we're in a spot of trouble, don't we? The first thing Mum would do if she was waylaid would be to contact us. She would also get in touch with her drama pupils at St. Clair's, wouldn't she? To tell them she wasn't going to show up for rehearsals. But she never contacted anyone, and this is not like her at all."
"Charlotte, I'm as worried as you are about your mother, but unlike you, I'm not going to panic, not yet. If your mother has been in an accident, we'd have been contacted already by the police. They're very efficient about that sort of thing. Her identification is on her person."
"Dad, I can't believe you're talking like this. Don't you get it?" said Charlotte, looking at her father in indignation. "This is not the way Mum behaves, Dad. It's not her character. She would have contacted us."
"Sweetheart, any manner of things could have happened to your mother. She could have mislaid her cell phone. That happens too, you know. Maybe it's not charged. Maybe she's so busy she lost track of time. Maybe she couldn't get a signal on her phone. Maybe she's not feeling well and has decided to book into a hotel room for a rest."
"Oh, Dad, you sound ridiculous. Why on earth would she do something like that?" "Dad, what's going on? Is there something you're not telling me? Why do I get the distinct feeling there is something you're not telling me?"
"No, of course not, love. I can't think what you're talking about. I'm as clueless as you are to the whereabouts of your mother. But unlike you, I'm not going to panic about it. Not yet, at least. Your mother hasn't been away for that long. I'm not sure where she is. But I was just covering some of the things that might have occurred to her, which might explain why she's not been in touch, that's all."
"You look pretty cagey, Dad. I'm sorry to say, but you do. Almost as if you're hiding something. You do know where Mum is, don't you? Oh, my God, you haven't done something to her, have you?"
"Enough, Charlotte. Listen to yourself. I'm your father. Do you think I'm capable of hurting your mother? Of course not. I might remind you, I'm the only member of this entire family that even refuses to kill a fly. But in summer, you're the one, Charlotte, squatting them within an inch of their lives, boasting that you've killed 100 of the things."
"I'm sorry, Dad. That came out all wrong, I admit it. I know you could never hurt Mum. But, Dad, I'm just looking at every case scenario, and you're behaving—"
"I'm behaving like what, Charlotte? Go on, say it."
"Well, you're not concerned as you should be, Dad. Come on, you know this is incongruous behaviour for Mum not to turn up for rehearsals. You're acting all nonchalant about it. What are you hiding, Dad?"
All right. I admit there is something I haven't told you," said Mr. Paisley, lifting up his hand in surrender. "You know sometimes your mother can overreact, like the time when she marched out of the hospital, when she ran away from her breast reduction surgery. If you remember, she got herself into quite the panic, took herself away for a long drive, didn't she? She didn't bother getting in touch with any one of us. No one knew where the hell she was. I think your mother had terrifying visions of the surgeons trying to locate her, dragging her back to the surgery, kicking and screaming, and cutting her up into tiny pieces. Do you remember how terrified she was? I was the one that found her drinking herself silly at a bar 2 hours outside of Seattle, after the bar manager insisted on calling me on her behalf, because he knew she couldn't drink and drive. Your mother deliberately avoided getting in touch. She was worried I'd be as mad as a hatter with her for running away from the operation, which she wanted in the first place. I'd been the one actively discouraging her from going under the knife for years on end. I don't trust those cosmetic surgeons. Never have, never will. Everything they do is for money. If the truth be told, I was bloody glad she didn't go through with it."
"Yes, but Dad, that was different. Mum was in a dreadful state. She was terrified out of her wits. If you remember, she was convinced she was going to die on the operation table, that the surgeons were going to accidentally perforate her lungs or something. The night before her surgery, she'd been reading up about people's botched up, disfigured bodies after surgery. People who had died on the table during a procedure due to the incompetence of the surgeon. I think her reaction was understandable in the circumstances, don't you? She was afraid. She was so upset that even though she had been prepped for surgery, she ran away from the hospital like a cowering animal, avoiding the slaughter. But this is a whole different ball game, Dad. I mean, Mum isn't running away from anything, is she?" Mr. Paisley looked awkward. His face flushed as red as a field of poppies.
"Is it a whole different ball game, Charlotte? I'm not so sure. Your mother can sometimes react dramatically, in ways that is not always normal, which is what I suspect she's done. When she behaves like this, her prudence tends to fly out of the window.
Charlotte stared at her father. "Oh, Dad, what happened? You've got to tell me."
"Well, I have to say, love, that me and your mother had a bit of a barney at lunchtime, when she popped over to the house at about 1:30 this afternoon."
"Dad, I don't believe you. I've been worried sick about Mum's whereabouts, and you dismiss this crucial bit of information that might actually stop me from having a panic attack. You're only now bothering to announce that you had an argument with Mum. Did you upset her?"
Mr. Paisley hung his head in shame, rather like the family dog that had chewed up the sofa and had to face the gravity of his crime from his less than enamoured owners.
"I will admit your mother was decidedly upset. She left the house in quite the huff, I have to say, slamming the door behind her so loudly that she practically made me jump out of my skin. Let's just say she didn't leave the house quietly. She was in a right bad mood."
"But, Dad, what was the argument about? I need to know." Mr. Paisley shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly.
"It was nothing major. You know what your mother's like. She's so quick to overreact, to make a mountain out of a molehill."
"But, Dad, what happened? Stop speaking in riddles, for goodness sake."
"Well, your mother had been on a bit of a shopping spree that morning. She didn't have any lessons to teach at St. Clair's, and you know how extravagant your mother can be at times. Sometimes she seems completely incapable of curbing her spending. She went completely ballistic on the credit card, spending a sizable fortune on an outfit for June Springfield's wedding next year. And I'm sorry, but I draw the line in spending a fortune on an outfit that your mother cannot even fit into. That, to me, is insanely ridiculous."
"What do you mean she can't fit into it, Dad?"
"I mean, love, your mother spent our hard-earned money on a frivolous dress that cost an arm and a leg, 2 sizes too small for her. Your mother assured me she was going to lose weight for June Springfield's wedding, so that she can fit into that dress. She said that buying a smaller size would give her motivation to lose the weight. She's done this before, Charlotte. I'm sure you know that. I told your mother to take the dress right back to the boutique, to swap it for a dress that actually fit her, and then I would be happy, and we would say no more about the matter. I told her in no uncertain terms that she was living in a fool's paradise if she thought she'd shed all that weight in time for June's wedding. Your mother was furious with me, spitting fire she was, making out that I was being completely unreasonable."
"What are you saying, Reggie? Are you telling me you have no faith in my ability to lose weight? You think I can't slim down, is that it? That I have no self-discipline or control?"
"It's not that I don't have faith in you, love. Far from it. But the human body is a complicated affair. If it was so easy to lose weight, the world wouldn't have an obesity problem. The human body does everything it can to conserve energy. I heard that somewhere. Science has proved that even exercise helps very little with weight loss. I think you're setting yourself up unreasonable expectations. The last time you were the size of that dress was when you were at senior high. You can't possibly expect to be that size again. You're being far too idealistic."
"Are you saying I'm fat and old? Is that what you're saying, Reggie? Go on. I dare you to say it."
"I'm not saying anything of the kind. But what I am saying, love, is that you are being completely unrealistic. Your expectations are far too high. I mean, look at me, for example. My weight has been pretty stable over the years, and yet I'm still not the same size myself as I was when I was at senior high. But unlike you, I'm realistic enough to know I will unlikely to be that size again."
"So what are you saying, Reggie? You think I'm delusional, is that it? You really don't believe I've got the willpower and resolve to fit into this dress for the wedding?"
"Why are you going around in circles, love? I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm telling you that there is a high probability of failure when it comes to your diet, that you will not fit in that dress." I don't mind spending a sizable amount of money on a dress if you love it so much. But I resent that kind of expenditure if you're never going to wear it. And believe me, love, you will not be wearing that dress for her wedding. Why? Because you won't fit into it, that's why.
So that's what this is about, Reggie. You're angry with me for spending so much money on myself. How dare you? I work very hard for a living, to bring money to the table, and for once in my life I think I'm entitled to spoil myself a little, don't you? But no, you can't stand it, can you? You can't bear it when I spend money on myself. It really bothers you, doesn't it, Reginald?
Reginald sighed. Well, if you must know, love, it bothers me when you're wasteful. I do think you're extravagant. You're a bit of a shopaholic, and I'm sorry, but it needs to be said. I've not had the heart to say this to you before, Emma, but enough is enough. This frivolity and reckless, irrational spending has got to stop. There are dozens of brand new clothes hanging in your wardrobe that you've never worn a day in your life. They've still got the labels on. Why is that? Because you can't fit into them. And some of them you brought on an impulsive whim in the hope that one day you might just fit into them. But to date, this mysterious supernatural weight loss you believe is coming your way has not happened. It's all fanciful, love. Pie in the sky. I don't like to see our hard-earned money going down the drain, wasted so senselessly.
How dare you, Reginald, speak to me in this way? You're incredibly mean. If I want to buy clothes that don't fit me, I'm entitled to do just that. I've earned half this money, I'd like to remind you. And what I do with it is none of your damn business. I don't pick on you if you buy a sweater that I don't like.
It is my business, love. I beg to disagree. We earn money as a team, don't we? Our money we pool together collectively as a couple. I like to invest it wisely, not spend it uselessly, on something completely redundant. And by the way, if I bought a sweater for myself that you personally did not like, I would take it back at once, no questions asked, because I respect your opinion.
How dare you speak to me like this, Reginald? I can't believe how dreadfully unkind you're being. And you're the one that's being unreasonable, not me.
I'm not being unkind, Emma. I'm trying to make you see sense. There is a difference. Your mother, I'm afraid, Charlotte, was very angry with me. She was in tears. I really seemed to have pressed the wrong buttons with her. We exchanged some unpleasantries, and then she flew out of the house, got into her white Peugeot to escape from me, and accelerated down the drive at one hell of a speed to make a statement, I suspect. I cannot recall a time I saw her this angry.
Oh, my goodness, Dad. Now this makes perfect sense to me. Mum is really upset. That's why she barged off in the way she did. Did she say where she was going?
Well, I can't remember it all, love. It wasn't pretty, let's just say. She told me I was a prize cad who didn't understand her when I told her to calm down, that we could talk about this. She didn't want to listen. She sashayed through the house like a wild wind, and she told me in no uncertain terms that she never wanted to speak to me ever again, as long as she lived. In truth, I don't think me and your mother have had such a feisty argument like that for many years. I felt, Charlotte, that the truth needed to be told. I just cannot bear to see our good, hard-earned money wasted on high-end extravagant things that Emma does not need. I mean, I want your mother to be happy, of course I do. And I'm quite happy for her to spoil herself. I believe we all need spoiling from time to time. But I felt I had to put my foot down in the circumstances. I mean, buying such an expensive over-the-top dress for a wedding that we will be attending in a year's time is all well and good, if the dress actually fits you. But buying one 2 sizes too small is an extravagant waste of money. I knew what would happen with that dress, love. It would go into early retirement like so many of her other abandoned clothes, and hang in that closet neglected for years, a miserable reminder of another goal not reached. Who needs that in their lives to discourage them? Isn't life hard enough already?
You're right, Dad. Absolutely right, Charlotte agreed. I'm sorry, Dad, if I flew off the handle with you, but I was so dreadfully worried about Mum. My guess is she stormed out of the house, and you know what she's like when she's mad. It's the only time she throws her common sense out of the window, like a discarded apple core. She's probably driven right out of Seattle to the countryside, like she did that time before, when she ran away from that breast reduction operation that she couldn't go through with. She's just furious with you. But I'm sure she'll simmer down. She'll be back once the water's settled. I just wish, Dad, you'd told me this before I sounded the panic button.
I'm sorry, love. I should have told you, I know. But I felt rather ashamed of myself for laying it all on so thick with your mother. I probably shouldn't have been so hard on her.
The way I see it, Dad, is Mum's the unreasonable one, not you. We'll give her 24 hours to come to her senses. Honestly, she shouldn't have overreacted like this.
Well, your mother isn't a drama queen for nothing, is she, love? And to be fair, that's why I love her so much. The world would be a lot smaller place without her in it. That is for sure.
The evening had passed with a slow drudgery, without Mrs. Paisley's effervescent presence, as both father and daughter had few words this evening to say to each other, as they tucked into their takeaway pizzas they'd ordered, and settled down to watch a movie together. Both were hoping to hear the familiar sound of Mrs. Paisley's white Toyota rolling up the driveway, the door being opened, keys being rattled, and the familiar sound of Mrs. Paisley's patent leather shoes tapping across the hallway as she navigated her way towards the kitchen. But it never happened. Charlotte felt decidedly sorry for her father, as he looked rather downcast this evening. His eyes were locked up in a faraway look that was ridden with regret about having spoken in haste. It was true. He was now repenting in leisure, lightly wishing he could undo the conversations he'd had with his wife, like the drop stitches in your grandmother's knitting. Charlotte suspected that he was secretly chastising himself. The truth was, Charlotte wholeheartedly agreed with her father on this issue, so it was hard for her to be angry with him, as she would have taken his side in this argument. She was actually proud of her father for standing up to her mother, and finally putting his foot down, which he should have done a long time ago. Much as she adored her mother, Charlotte knew very well that Emma Paisley was a bit of a spendthrift, and loved indulging herself in buying ludicrously expensive things that she was unlikely to ever wear. And this was something that had always bothered Charlotte, who hated waste of any kind, and really believed that humanity was pilfering the planet with their insane, needless extravagances, which she believed were created around the human ego. People like that are caught up in the matrix. She believed our world is a simulation, and you're stuck if you're caught up in the web of materialism, and the only way you can ever set yourself free is not being a slave to it. Helen was an environmentalist in many regards, with a zealous passion for the ocean and all its beloved creatures, and she had seen what the oil spills had done to the ocean, its habitat, and all the wild animals, all in the name of greed, where the fat cats in our world were gluttonously hungry to fill the bowels of their life with even more showy things, and their bank vaults with an excess of money they would never get to use in their entire lifetimes. And for what? Charlotte could not comprehend. One evening when Charlotte had stayed over with her best friend Jellica, she had been absolutely mortified to see Jellica's mother trashing perfectly good food because it was a day over the sell-by date, when there was nothing wrong with it at all. Things like that irked her greatly. She abhorred senseless waste in a world where children in Africa were dying of starvation, even though that may sound like a cliché. She also despised the great big discrepancies between the haves and the have-nots in our society, and she thought it was grossly obscene to own sparkling opulent yachts in the Mediterranean, a host of fancy over-the-top sports cars, and several grandiose mansions in all parts of the globe. Then there were people like Bill Gates, buying an excess of land. And for what? Who needed so much? And at the end of the day, were these people even happier having so much more than anyone else? Charlotte doubted it very much, as some of the richest kids in her own school were conspicuously to her the most miserable. It's sickening, Charlotte would say. What's wrong with these gluttonous, greedy fat cats? Why are they exploiting the world's resources with their excessive greed? Why can't they be happy with a couple of cars and a house? Nobody needs excess.
I'm sorry, love, said Mr. Paisley apologetically. This is all my fault. Your mother not being at home, I mean. I think I really upset her this time. Me and your mother, we never fight as a general rule. But I was so frustrated about all this needless spending. It's not just the money, you know. It's the waste. I mean, perfectly good clothes lying in a corpse of a wardrobe indefinitely, where they'll never rise from the dead.
Dad, didn't I just tell you a moment ago? I don't blame you at all for this. You told Mum what she needed to hear, and I'm proud of you for that. She didn't like it one bit, and swanned off in a huff. But you know what, Dad? Sometimes you have to tell people the truth, even if it's not what they want to hear. Mum will come round in the end, and you never know. You might have helped her see some sense along the way.
Well, I hope so, love. But you know your mother. She can be like a bear with a sore head at times.
Before long, Charlotte slumped casually on the couch. She fell into a deep sleep, while the television remained on. Her father had long since retired to bed. Then she noticed her father's cell phone was ringing on the coffee table. She decided to inspect it. It might be her mother, she thought. Charlotte reached out to grab the phone, and noticed it was indeed her mother's cell phone, calling. So she quickly answered it. "Mum! Is that you, Mum? Where the hell are you? We've been worried sick about you. You need to come home at once."
Sorry, ma'am. This is not your mother speaking, I'm afraid. But I suspect she must be the owner of this cell phone.
Oh, my God! Has my mother been in an accident or something? Is that what you're saying? Otherwise, why is a perfect stranger speaking to me on her cell?
Ma'am, you've got your wires crossed. My name is Todd Wendcroft. I manage the bar here at the Horse and Hound, and as far as I'm concerned, the owner of this cell phone is perfectly fine. Well, she was when she left the bar about 2 hours ago. I haven't seen her since. I believe her name is Emma Paisley, as that's the name on her driving licence here. She's a voluptuous woman, isn't she? Auburn hair, fair skin, dresses quite bohemian. Lovely floaty silky dress and big earrings.
That's right. That's her. That's my mother.
Well, I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm afraid it would seem your mother left her purse and her cell phone behind in the bar. Someone handed it in to me. She hasn't come back to collect it. So I took the liberty of inspecting the contents for myself. I thought I would phone a family member. Her cell phone is not locked. To let someone know that her purse is at our bar, in case Emma is wondering where she left it.
There was an awkward pause for a moment.
I'm very concerned, ma'am, I have to say, because there's a lot of money in her wallet here, and I wouldn't want it to get stolen. I think there is $800 in her wallet, ma'am. That's a hell of a lot of money to be carrying around loose like this. I didn't know people carry that amount of cash around these days. Ostensibly, she's got her whole life here in her purse. I imagine losing this money would be very inconvenient for her, and very expensive to boot. So I thought you would like to know the purse is safely in my hands. She just needs to ask for Mr. Woodcroft, and I will keep it safely for her in the bar safe, until she picks it up herself.
I'm very grateful for you, Mr. Woodcroft, getting in contact with me like this. Well, this is actually my father's phone, but I appreciate it so very much.
It's not a problem, ma'am. As I was saying, I'm concerned about your mother losing her purse. I wouldn't want it getting in the wrong hands, if you get my drift. There's nothing more frustrating than not knowing where you left something. I think her house keys are in the purse, if I'm not mistaken. So I suspect when she does get home, she'll find she's locked herself out.
Emma could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her mother had gone to some bar to drown her sorrows, when she should have been responsible and orchestrating the rehearsals for murder on the Orient Express at St. Clair's. Her inability to let everybody know where she was had left everyone with much disquiet. A whole drama class had been grievously concerned for her welfare. Honestly, why had her mother selfishly been behaving like this? She must have been grievously upset with her father to just go medicating herself with alcohol. Why would she do such a nonsensical thing? Charlotte was reminded that the very same set of circumstances had transpired when her mother had run away from a breast reduction surgery. She had been found in a bar outside of Seattle, drinking alcohol to anaesthetize her anxiety. So this was not the first time this had happened, but she hoped it would be her last. Honestly, what the hell was her mother thinking? "So my mother was at your bar, Mr. Woodcroft?"
"That's right, but she left a while ago, as I was saying."
"How long was she there at your bar? Do you remember? My mother's the kind of woman people notice, you know."
"Well, you're not wrong about that, ma'am. She was here for a long time, I'm afraid. She also was inebriated, but as you can imagine, she made quite the impression on everyone. Quite the charmer, your mother is. Had everyone in stitches of laughter when she started to play the part of Hercule Poirot in Murder of the Orient Express, on the Orient Express, sorry. I don't think I've seen anybody laugh as much in our bar for a long time. One minute she was there, but then she promptly vanished. I thought she'd gone to the powder room or something. I think she drove away in a hurry before I had a chance to stop her, in her white Peugeot, I believe it was. Just so you know, ma'am, I consider it my responsibility to always ensure that I never let people drive home drunk. You cannot be too careful, ma'am. A drunk person on the road is like a loaded pistol. I've seen the damage myself when people drive drunk. I always make our customers get alternative transportation. Sometimes I drive them home myself in the minivan, which works out reasonably well. I also do have a spare room upstairs for anybody who is very, very drunk that they can use overnight. I was actually going to suggest this to your mother before she left, but she slipped through my fingers like butter. I have to be honest with you, ma'am. I wasn't completely comfortable of the thought of her driving with a little bit too much alcohol in her system. As far as I know, there's been no accidents reported on our roads, so I assume she must have got home safely."
"But she never came home. We've been worried sick about her. She never bothered to even tell us where she was. How did she seem when she first arrived at your bar?"
"Well, she appeared upset. She was wittering on about things. She mentioned she'd had a blowout with her husband. He didn't like her buying a dress that was too small for her or something. He told her she'd never fit into it. She was complaining about that a lot, describing her husband as a loser. It wasn't very pretty, I have to say."
"Whereabouts is your bar located? How far are you from Seattle?"
"Goodness gracious me! Are you in Seattle? That's a long way away. I just assumed your mother lived in the next town."
"Well, whereabouts is your bar?"
"Well, we're about 3 hours outside of Seattle. It's very countrified around here, quite rural. I can send you the address if you like. Your mother was noticed in our bar as not being a regular. No one had ever seen her before. I expect if you live so far away, she could be on the highway by now. I'm sure she will be with you soon. Either that, or maybe she's done the sensible thing and booked herself into a hotel overnight. I hope she's done that. I would strongly recommend to her, if I were you, not to go driving under the influence ever again. It's a reckless thing to do, but sometimes when people have had a little too much to drink, they tend to persuade themselves that their senses are still very sharp, when they are not. I see this all the time with my locals, you know. You can cause fatalities on the road, and if you get arrested by the police, it's a prison sentence. I just hope your mother gets back safe and sound, ma'am. But let me just say, she must never do this again."
"Exactly how drunk was my mother? I can't believe no one stopped her from driving in her condition."
Well, love, I have to tell you that she would have been stopped from driving if anybody in the bar had actually known that she intended to drive away. Apparently she claimed to need to go to her car to get something, but then her car just literally left the parking lot, so she did drive away. But I think, to be fair, she possibly could have walked in a straight line. She just seemed, a little uninhibited, if you know what I mean. But if you're wondering if I think she could drive home in her condition, I think so. But it's just not advised to drink and drive, if you get my point. She was tiddly, but not over the top.
Well, thank you for phoning, Mr. Woodcroft. I really, really appreciate it. As Charlotte put down the phone, she knew she needed to go after her mother to see if she could locate her whereabouts. Emma Paisley. Emma Paisley was absolutely furious. Her husband's words burned her like a steak being flung on a hot grill. She knew she wanted to get the hell away from him. She wanted him to really regret his mean words that he had spurted at her so unkindly, off the cuff like that. She should never have left the bag from the boutique on the kitchen counter of all things. But she knew that hiding it away in front of her husband's discerning eyes would have drawn attention to the package, as he would have known that she had something to hide. And unfortunately Reginald Paisley could read her like a book.
"What's that you have there, love?"
her husband had asked, eyeing the glamorous-looking bag with the boutique's logo on it, with a degree of suspicion on his face.
"Oh, it's absolutely nothing," she said, waving her hand nonchalantly. "It's just a scarf, that I picked up, that's all. It caught my eye. Got it for a bargain. It was on the sale. Awfully cheap it was."
Her husband studied her for a brief moment, through narrowing eyes, as if he didn't believe a word of it, as if she was failing to call his bluff. He cleared his throat and said gingerly,
"As long as you haven't broken the bank, love, that's all I care about."
Emma rolled her eyes.
"What are you like, Reginald? Of course I didn't break the bank. What do you take me for, love? How about I get some lunch for us?" she said, eager to change the subject. "I've got some superb ham and some delicious potato salad and coleslaw. How does that sound? I bought it from that lovely delicatessens in town. You know, the new one that's just opened. I gather it's an Italian owner, and oh my word, you don't know how delicious the stuff is they have on sale there. The place was packed. Everybody wanted to buy everything. You couldn't blame them. I couldn't resist buying you the most delicious-looking cheesecake for dessert." "Well, it sounds good. Well, lovely, actually,"
said Reginald, watching his wife industriously busy herself around the kitchen, removing the packaging from the groceries that she had bought at the delicatessens, and laying them out on the kitchen table for lunch. It was a delicious-looking spread.
"Let's put this away, shall we?"
said her husband, picking up the boutique bag, glancing briefly inside, and Emma quickly scuttled towards him to grab the bag away from him.
"Oh, let me put that away, shall I?" she said hurriedly. "You're right, we don't want to get the food on my beautiful scarf, do we? I'll take it up to the bedroom right now."
Reginald held up his hand.
"Not so fast, love. You're behaving evasively. And if you don't mind my saying so, this package is far too big for a scarf. What are you hiding from me, love? What are you not telling me? I think it has something to do with what you've actually bought at that exclusive boutique for yourself. Something you don't want me to know about. Oh, don't be ridiculous, Reginald. What would I have to hide from you?" "We'll find out, shall we?" said Reginald. "I'm going to look at what you bought," he said, shuffling through the tissue paper. "And let me just say, Emma, this does not look like a scarf to me," he said, pulling out the dress to examine it closely. "Beautiful fabric, I must say. But this is not a scarf, it's a dress."
"All right, I lied," admitted Emma.
"I know what you're like, Reginald, when I go shopping, that's all. You're always inclined to think I'm extravagant. I thought if I told you it was a scarf that would shut you up." "But you are extravagant, love. Don't tell me something I already know. I'd like to have a closer look at this dress of yours, if I may. I'm intrigued as to what you're hiding from me, love. I have a sense that this dress was not on sale, was it?"
Emma's heart dipped when her husband inspected the label on the dress, looking up at her in abject astonishment. She predicted his reaction, and it came like a brick being flung into her face.
$1,000,
he said aghast, looking at his wife in bewilderment through his steely grey eyes.
You've paid $1,000 for a dress? Are you insane? No wonder you didn't want me to see it. You knew I would completely lose it.
You're right. I knew you would react like this, Reginald. That's why I told you it was a scarf. If you must know, it's a dress for the wedding we're going to next year, of one of my ex-drama pupils. I thought it would be perfect for the occasion. I want to look my best at the wedding. It's terribly glamorous, don't you think?"
"It is a glamorous dress, love, with no expense spared, I can see."
"Reginald, $1,000 is not all that much for a designer creation, you know. Some of those celebrities on the red carpet wear haute couture dresses that cost between $12,000 to $30,000, and I'm not exaggerating either."
"Well, that's completely ridiculous. Over the top, if you ask me. Don't try and make excuses for your extravagances, love. This dress still didn't come cheap."
Emma Paisley watched her husband examine the dress size on the label, and he physically frowned.
"This dress is tiny, love. How are you ever going to fit into it? If you got into this, you'd look like a stuffed sausage. This is ridiculous. You've bought another one of those dresses that is far too small for you. Why would you do that? It's one thing that you spent a fortune on yourself buying something that could fit you, but wearing something that you can't fit into is nonsensical. It's like someone with a peanut allergy buying a bag of peanuts that they're never ever going to eat."
"Don't be ridiculous, Reginald," Emma retorted, grabbing the dress hurriedly from her husband and stuffing it into the bag. "I don't expect you to understand any of this. It may not fit now, but I've got a year to lose the weight, haven't I? And when I do, I'm going to look absolutely sensational in this dress. It's a showstopper, love. I'd never ever find another dress like this at such a price. Every one of those select dresses in that designer boutique are designed by an up-and-coming designer called Mark Phillips. They're unique. This dress is one of a kind, and I absolutely love it. It's ethereal and light to the touch, and when I'm smaller, it'll float around me."
"Love, I will agree with you. The dress is beautiful. I will give you that. And, of course, as usual, you have excellent taste in clothing. But I have to put my foot down. You are going to take this dress back. Do you understand what I'm saying? You are not being realistic. You will never fit into that dress. You can change it for a dress in your size, but you must take it back. How many clothes, love, are sitting in your wardrobe that you simply cannot wear, because you bought them several sizes too small, in the vain hope that one day you might actually fit into them? And that has never happened to date. You've got bigger over the years, not smaller, love."
"How dare you, Reginald, insult me like this? Are you telling me I'm fat? Why have you got to be so mean and offensive?" said Emma, tears springing into her eyes. "I'm not going to take the dress back, no matter what you say, and I refuse to swap it for a bigger size. I'm just not going to do it. You cannot make me do it. I'm wearing this dress for the wedding in a year's time, and for your information, I will fit into it," she said, grabbing the boutique bag and her purse, and dashing hurriedly towards the front door, with Reginald running after her.
"Emma, get back now. Where are you going? Don't be ridiculous. I don't think you're fat, love. I love you just the way you are. You've got a perfect figure, and I wouldn't want you any thinner. But as I was telling you, You're never going to fit in the dress. And that's all I was saying. I did not mean to offend you." "How dare you insult me, Reginald? You've inadvertently told me I'm fat. I'm not stupid. I can read between the lines, you know. You want to know where I'm going? Do you really want the answer to that question? I'm going somewhere where I can be as far away from you as humanly possible, because right now looking at you is making me violently sick. Do you think I enjoy lying to you, Reginald? Of course I don't, but you give me no choice, because I knew how you would predictably react to that beautiful dress I bought myself, in the way that you always do. You just love to ruin everything with your snide remarks."
Reginald shook his head sorrowfully as he watched his indignant wife get into her white Peugeot, slamming down the accelerator as she hightailed it down the drive with the resolute determination of a wild horse that had escaped the confines of its stable and wanted to get the hell away as fast as it possibly could.
"Bloody cheek!"
thought Emma Paisley indignantly as she drove away in her white Peugeot. Where she was going, even she was not certain. She would allow the orchestral strings of fate to pull her in the right direction, as the swampy mire of her muddied emotions felt stagnant with regret. Tears poured down her cheeks, like the lonely raindrops on a glass pane. She felt exceedingly frustrated with her husband Reginald for pouring acid over her dreams with his cruel, unthoughtful words. Maybe he didn't mean to be unkind with his heedless, cutting remarks, but he'd successfully made Emma Paisley feel like a naughty, badly behaved school kid that had stolen the cookies from the glass jar and had been reprimanded severely by her parents for her mischief. She didn't appreciate her husband's condescending attitude, where he patronized and belittled her like this, making such a monumental deal over a dress she'd bought for herself, with a great deal of personal pleasure and satisfaction. And why should she be denied some of life's pleasing gifts? I mean, was it not her business what she bought with her hard-earned cash? How dare he look through her shopping and put such a damper on her joy like this, by saying the dress would never ever fit her? I mean, how mean could you be? She'd never forget the disappointed look on his face. He had worn exactly the same look she'd seen on her father's face when she was a girl, when she accidentally broke her mother's precious Ming vase that had been worth a sizable fortune. She had felt like that reprimanded little girl all over again, and the fierce, tormenting memories had thrown her into a panic. She could see her father now in her mind's eye, his jowls wobbling with fury.
"If you didn't go running down the passage like a bat out of hell, this Ming vase of your mother's would still be in one piece," he had growled at her contemptuously. "You stupid, stupid girl! What on earth is wrong with you, Emma? Why don't you ever look where you're going?"
When Emma's husband had given her the same look as her father had done when she was a little girl, she felt as if the walls were folding in on her on every side, and the nauseous claustrophobia made her feel as if she could not breathe and needed to escape. When her father had become irate, she would always run and hide behind a bush in the yard, staying there for hours on end until her father's stormy mood had subsided and all was forgiven and forgotten. It had been such a pleasure to buy that dress, and her husband had ruined the whole experience for her. Did she not have a right, like any other woman, to spoil herself from time to time? She knew she'd fit into the dress for the wedding next year. Why was that so impossible to believe? Emma Paisley was filled with a mixture of guilt, shame, embarrassment, and regret, although she'd be damned if she'd admit this to herself. A small, little, persistent voice in her head knew her husband was speaking sense, but she refused to listen to that voice. The chances were remote, the voice told her, that she would actually fit into the dress by next year. I mean, if it was so easy, she'd have lost the weight a long time ago, wouldn't she? But instead it had clung on to her like a blood-sucking leech. It would seem every diet she had embarked upon had failed her within the first week, when she had been tormented by images of wickedly decadent chocolate cake that flashed into her mind like a seductive temptress that you just could not ignore, even if you turned the other cheek. In that quintessential poignant moment, when the hands of time had stood unbearably still, Emma Paisley clean forgot about her beloved drama pupils at St. Clair's and the all-important rehearsal of Hercule Poirot's Murder on the Orient Express. Her obligations appeared to float away like a wistful balloon on the wind. She became tunnel-visioned in her focus, with a primal instinctive desire to escape her husband, like she'd felt about fleeing the surgeons at the hospital moments before she was due to have her breast reduction surgery, and like she'd escaped her bullishly bossy father when she was a little girl. Even if Mrs. Paisley was to look back at her mindset at this particular moment in time, she knew that the engine of her indignation was the driving force that propelled her away from Seattle. She needed to breathe again, as all the air in her lungs seemed to have been squeezed away. It would seem all other thoughts, responsibilities and obligations that saddled her to her life as a mother, wife and drama school teacher at St. Clair's had all but abandoned her, and she gave them no thought. She decided she would drive a few hours out of Seattle, into the heart of the open countryside, where she'd find the nearest bar to anaesthetize her emotions with alcohol. Emma had never been much of a drinker. She didn't even particularly like the stuff, but she did like the way alcohol made you feel when your life had dealt you a bowl of lemons. The day had started out so perfect. Why had her husband ruined it all for her by being so condescending about her purchase? When Emma Paisley had seen the mannequin in the boutique window in downtown Seattle, her heart had almost missed a beat. The dress that floated on the mannequin, in a flowing swathe of exquisite, breathtaking silky fabric, was pretty close to perfect. A large part of her wanted to ignore the dress, simply walk past it, pretend it wasn't there. That would have been the right thing to do. But the dress was so beguiling that by the time she'd returned from the delicatessens to pick up some cold pieces for lunch, she'd been unable to walk past the shop window again without stopping to take a second look at the all-enticing dress that seemed to draw her in like the bait at the end of a fisherman's line. Things, of course, got profoundly worse when she observed a glamorous-looking woman standing outside the boutique window, gawking in admiration at the dress that Emma wanted so very badly. For a second, Emma saw this woman as a potential threat to her purchase. She was terrified that the woman was going to walk into the boutique and snatch the dress far away from her. She had to get into the boutique quickly and grab the dress before the woman standing outside the window got any funny ideas about it. Emma Paisley's heart began to race. Her breathing quickened, her hands became clammy, a sweat broke out on her upper lip, as if a fight for survival literally depended on acquiring that dress. She knew this illustrious boutique in downtown Seattle produced one-of-a-kind dresses. Each dress was unique and individualistic, so if it didn't fit you, it was tough. The boutique was willing to take dresses in if they were too large, but if a dress was too small, they couldn't let it out for you. And the dress in the window Emma knew was far too small for her, but that did not matter to her in the slightest. She wanted that dress, and wild horses were not going to stop her from buying it, come what may. Emma Paisley rushed into the boutique and breathlessly asked the glamorous woman behind the counter for the dress in the window that was on the mannequin. "It's a lovely dress, isn't it?" said the woman. "The dress is, I'm afraid, only in one size. I think it will probably be 2 sizes too small for you," she said, running her eyes over Emma's physique. "How about you try one of our other dresses in a larger size? They are by the same designer, Mark Phillips, but I can find you one in your size that would be so much more suitable for you. I've got some unique dresses on offer, suitably designed for the more bosomous woman, if you know what I mean." Emma pretended not to hear the woman's cursory comments about her large breasts. "I don't want another dress. That's the one I want, the one in the window, the one on the mannequin," said Emma with an urgency in her voice that made the young lady behind the counter almost fall off her perch. The woman had an enviable figure, Everything about her was annoyingly perfect, and her sleek, long, dark hair was tied back in a neat ponytail, secured perfectly in place by a velvet black ribbon. Whether she was a shop assistant or owner, Emma could not be sure, but she sneakily suspected the latter was the case. The woman insisted that Emma called her Natalie. "I don't stand on ceremony here. Everybody knows me as Natalie. That's what I'd like you to call me. If you'd like to try the dress on, you may, but I do think you'll find it a bit on the small side," she said diplomatically, reluctantly going over to the mannequin to retrieve the dress from the shop window and handing it over to Emma to try on. Emma snatched the dress from the woman hurriedly, making her way into the changing room. She began to wrestle out of her clothes to try on the new dress. She could hear a woman's voice in the boutique talking to Natalie. She knew at once it was the woman that had previously been admiring the dress outside the boutique window, which had made Emma Paisley shoot into the boutique like a bat out of hell to acquire the dress before the woman did. "Yes, I was wondering if the dress you took off the mannequin a moment ago, that I was admiring in the window, I was wondering if I could try it on, if I may." "I'm sorry, but it's not possible. At the moment one of our customers is trying it on. We don't have any copies of that dress, I'm afraid. All the dresses are handmade. Each one is unique, so we don't have a selection of sizes." "You don't have any more copies of that particular dress in the window?" asked the woman, her disappointment palpable. "I'm afraid not, ma'am, but we do have lots of other dresses on offer that I can show you. And I assure you some of them are equally as stunning as the dress in the window. You shall not be disappointed." "But I'm not interested in another dress. I know the dress in the window would fit me perfectly. I really want that one. The size is perfect." "You've got very good taste, dear. It is a particularly lovely dress, and I think it would fit you perfectly. You might still be in luck. You never know. The lady who's trying on the dress, I doubt will fit into it. So I'm sure in the circumstances she won't buy it. So if you breeze through those dresses over there on the railing, you can wait to see if she's going to take the dress or not. And if she doesn't take it, you're welcome to try it on." When Emma heard this, she was all the more determined to buy the dress than ever. She'd be damned if another woman got her dream dress, just because they were significantly thinner than she was. She promptly thrust the dress over her shoulders, sensing how tight the clinging fabric was on her, and even stepping into the dress, she had to be very careful not to tear the fabric. But as she hoisted it over her neck and shoulders, and over her ample bosom, which required contorting her body at odd angles to get it on, as it clung to her so tightly, she did look rather like an oversized sausage that was bursting at the seams, but she didn't care. Finally she managed to wiggle into the dress. In truth, it was a miracle that she actually got it on. But where there's a will, there's often a way. The dress did not fit as she expected. She needed to drop quite a lot of weight. As she stared at her reflection in the mirror, she artfully persuaded herself that in a year's time she would fit perfectly into that dress. The reflection in the mirror staring back at her did her no favours. She really did feel a little like a beluga whale. The dress seemed to accentuate every undulating bump and undesirable curve in her figure. "It must be the mirror," she told herself. "Honestly, the mirrors in dressing rooms are just too dreadful for words. It's magnifying my size. I'm much smaller than this. I know I am." From tomorrow she was going on a diet, and she'd get into this dress, even if it killed her, as this was the dress she wanted to wear to the wedding. It had been a laborious struggle to get into the dress, and it was much the same to get out of it, but Emma Paisley was not easily put off. She wanted the dress, and she sidled over to the counter to buy it. She observed that the woman who was eager to buy the dress as well, that she had tried on, was eyeing the dress in her hands eagerly, like a greedy seagull with its beady eyes on a sandwich it wanted to snatch away from you. But Emma was not letting her beloved dress out of her sight. "I'm so sorry it didn't fit you," said Natalie, feigning surprise. as if it was impossible to believe that the oversized Mrs. Paisley could not fit into a dress designed for someone a lot more streamlined than she was. "It's a lot smaller than it looks, I'm afraid," she said tactfully, attempting to reach out for the dress, gathered tightly in Emma's hands. "Not to worry. As I was telling you, we have a superb selection of other dresses created by Mark Phillips himself that you're going to love. Some of them have got a 20% discount, you know." "That won't be necessary. The dress fits me perfectly," said Emma, handing the dress over to a shocked Natalie to ring up at the till. Natalie was taken aback, her eyes round in amazement. "You're going to take the dress?" she asked, looking somewhat bemused. "That's right," said Emma. "I'm taking it. I told you, it's a perfect fit." Natalie turned to the other lady and said apologetically, "I'm afraid we don't have any more of these dresses. But, as I told you, just look on the rails over there. There's some incredible dresses on display." The customer's face dropped with disappointment. She could not help but stand there gormlessly, watching Natalie fold up Emma's dress very neatly into tissue paper and place it into a select boutique bag. "Sorry," said Emma suddenly, as if it had only just occurred to her that the dress might be rather expensive. "There wasn't a price on the dress. How much is it?" The glamorous woman, who had been eager to buy the dress, her face appeared to brighten significantly. Perhaps she was clandestinely hoping that Emma could not afford to buy the dress, and that her luck was about to change. Emma knew by one glance at the customer that she was loaded, the kind of privileged person who could have everything that money could buy. Like the privileged person that Elsa was playing in Murder on the Orient Express. The woman's fingers were christened by huge diamond rings. She was dressed in expensive, slick designer clothes, and carrying a Gucci handbag on her person. "It's $1,000, said Natalie. "With a discount, it comes to $1,000. Do you still want to take it?" When Emma heard the price, her heart sank. But seeing the hungry, greedy look in the customer's eyes, that were so eager to snatch her prize away from her, she inwardly winced and then boldly said, "I'll take it then." "Excellent choice, I have to say," said Natalie, ringing up the dress for her. "It is such a beautiful dress. It really catches the eye. And the fabric is just too gorgeous for words." When Emma left the boutique and began to walk down the pavement, she felt a smug sense of satisfaction that she had deprived a precocious woman of getting something she wanted, which was probably a change. She privately wondered if buying the dress was a fruitless endeavour. Would she ever actually lose the weight to be able to fit into it? As Emma made her way speedily back home to enjoy lunch with her husband, she knew under no circumstances must he find out or get wind of the dress that she had purchased. He would not be best pleased by an impulsive, excessively expensive purchase like this, that he would deem excessively extravagant and a waste of money. Her daughter, Charlotte, would likely think the very same thing, as unfortunately her daughter wanted to save everything on the entire planet, and didn't look kindly on people who spent money frivolously. Emma decided if her husband asked her about what she'd bought, she'd tell him she got a bargain from the sale, and had purchased a scarf she liked. With the events of the morning still playing out in her head, Emma had finally left Seattle long behind her, like a bad memory she didn't want to entertain. She was beginning to feel as if she could breathe again. She was drawing in deep breaths, getting the oxygen back into her system. It was really great to be in the countryside. She enjoyed the feel of the cool, crisp air brushing tenderly against her cheeks from the half-open driver's side window. The journey outside of Seattle had gone by in what Emma would describe as an ambiguously foggy daze. She had driven on what she always believed was her instinctive autopilot mode. If the truth be told, she didn't know where the hell she actually was. But Emma Paisley liked adventure, so she wasn't remotely intimidated by the unfamiliar, verdant environment that swaddled her from every side, rather like a stranger welcoming you with open arms, like a long-lost friend, that she had never been acquainted with. Soon she was winding down lonely, sequestered country roads, like an intrepid explorer, feathered by tall, lofty trees. There wasn't a solitary soul around. The road looked like it went on forever, in a series of twists and curves and bends. Emma did not remember when she'd last actually observed a tractor, or even a car. She knew she was completely lost. She had seen no signs of even a solitary soul or a farmhouse for many miles. Where on earth was she? She managed to look up her current location on her GPS and the whereabouts of a countryside bar in the local area. The name of the bar bore an uncanny similarity to an English pub. It was called the Horse and Hound. It appeared to be a local watering hole that was situated approximately 20 minutes away. Maybe she wasn't so out in the sticks after all, even though it certainly felt as if she was in the middle of nowhere. I need to urgently answer a call of nature, she told herself, realizing she couldn't hold her bladder for a moment longer. She was desperate to relieve herself. She parked her car on the side of the road and staggered awkwardly out of the door, crossing her legs as tightly as she possibly could, and hurriedly making a beeline towards a cluster of trees. And once she relieved herself, she sensed that she was not alone, that she was being watched. She looked up in abject astonishment to see a tall, lofty creature staring at her in equal bewilderment, as if Emma was the very last person the critter had expected to see, rather like finding a rose bush growing in an arid desert. Emma realized she was observing a female Bigfoot that was covered in long dark brown hair that was so dark it was almost black. She had a face that was remarkably human, with high chiseled cheekbones and a protruding, heavily furrowed forehead, deep-set hooded dark eyes, and a flat aquatic nose. You have got to be kidding me, she thought. Was this happening to her? It couldn't be. This kind of thing happened to other people, but not to her. Never to her. But Emma knew her eyes were not deceiving her, and what she was seeing was profoundly real. The Bigfoot was staring at her, with a gobsmacked expression on her face, as if she too was trying to acclimatize to Emma's unlikely presence in this lonely part of Washington State. Emma wondered if she should dash back to the car. The Bigfoot might give her chase, and that could potentially put her in grave danger, as Emma doubted she could outrun such an obviously powerful athlete, as the female Bigfoot was ripped, with shoulders so ponderously large they would intimidate a gridiron football player, wearing those powerfully large shoulder pads, without a doubt. She realized she needed to walk away very slowly, so as not to encourage the creature to chase after her. That's what you did, didn't you, in the wild, when being stalked by a wild animal? And yet everything about this Bigfoot spoke of the creature being more human than animalistic. But you needed to pretend that you weren't afraid. The Bigfoot did not flinch, nor did she move. She remained stoically in one position, just staring at Emma. Emma's heart pounded vigorously in her chest. I need to get out of here, she thought, her mind screaming warnings at her. But even as she attempted to move away, she found herself steadily anchored to the spot, like a boat in its mooring site, almost as if in some way the Bigfoot herself had immobilized her, rendered her incapacitated or disabled from moving. She certainly got the rather strange, airy sense that this female Bigfoot wanted her attention for some reason, as if she wanted to tell Emma something significantly important. Emma did not know where this impression came from, but it was so strong that it was a feeling that Emma could not ignore. In a trice she found her gaze being locked into the Bigfoot's eyes, like a swirling vortex that seemed to pull her, and there was no escape. As try as she might, she couldn't look away from those dark brown eyes. She found herself being drawn straight into them. The Bigfoot was about 8 foot tall, with enviable small breasts and powerful, strapping, strong legs that remained steadfastly rooted to the ground. The Bigfoot was so enormous that Emma suddenly felt conspicuously small in the Bigfoot's mighty presence. But as her gaze remained locked in the Bigfoot's eyes, she realized that the Bigfoot exuded a kind, gentle, very warm energy, and that her fears towards the creature were completely unfounded. "What are you doing here?" she heard a voice in her head that she knew at once came from the female Bigfoot. "You must go away at once. If Daygard knew you were here, he would kill you. You must go. Do you understand? Daygard is very dangerous to your kind," she said, shaking her bullet-shaped head. "You've left your scent marking here, under that tree," she said, pointing to the wet spot where Emma Paisley had relieved herself. "That will displease him greatly, for he will believe you are trying to challenge his authority, and he won't like that one bit. This is his territory, you see. You must go at once before he sees you." Emma could see the female Bigfoot was urgently worried. She kept nervously glancing over her very large shoulders, as if she was disquieted that this Daygard character, whoever he was, would appear out of the ether, like a nasty, unwelcome surprise, to launch a wild, frenzied attack on Emma, with more than lightly deadly consequences, by the sounds of things. "Daygard does not like your kind," she repeated. "He's an impending threat to you. You need to escape at once." Emma established that some kind of extraordinary telepathic exchange was occurring between the two of them. She had never experienced this kind of communication before, but marvelled at the paradoxical peculiarity of it all. She felt as if she was caught in a bizarre dream, or some kind of parallel universe. I mean, was this really happening to her? Was she communicating telepathically with a Bigfoot? It would seem so. The female Bigfoot spoke to her earnestly again. "Daygard has a long memory. He doesn't forget easily, nor does he forgive. He holds your kind in scant regard, I'm afraid. His hand was blown off by a hunter, so he wants to extract his revenge. Your scent marker has challenged his territory. This will make him incensed. You need to leave now, before it's too late. I cannot protect you from him. He is much stronger and mightier than I am. You must hurry back to your car at once. I can sense he's coming. If he sees you, you're doomed. He's coming. You need to go." The alarmed voice in Emma's head was filled with immense trepidation and anxiety, as if the voice was pleading her to leave at once. Emma did not need any further encouragement from the female Bigfoot. She responded in kind, for she could hear an ominous, loud, booming sound of mammoth feet thundering violently through the trees as they moved closer and closer and closer towards her. And in that moment the danger she sensed was palpable, that she could practically taste its bitter flavour on her tongue. It seemed like the whole grove vibrated under the colossal weight of the stupendous high-octane creature that was charging towards her like an angry, incensed rhino in the thicket. Emma could hear twigs breaking, the ground heave, followed by a loud, gulled grunt and a raucous, ear-piercing bellow that was so disquieting that her whole body wobbled and shook like a jelly. Emma knew she needed to get out of here at once. "Go!" the female Bigfoot screamed in her head. "Go, or he will kill you! I'm warning you! Go!" Emma's body, like a stalling car, refused to start up. It suddenly spluttered and sprang into life. Her body, supercharged with a burst of adrenaline, the likes of such she'd never known before, miraculously propelled her ever towards her white Peugeot, where the keys thankfully remained in their keyhole, and the door to her car was still ajar, making her prompt exit from this bodefully inauspicious place a whole lot more easy. She could hear the booming, clamorous sound of the ponderous, substantial-sized feet charging behind her, along with the heavy, formidable breathing that turned her blood icy cold. She didn't dare look back. She was terribly afraid of what she would see. She knew looking back would incapacitate her, sever her chances of getting away. Finally, with her heart heaving through her chest and her body on the verge of imminent collapse,
With trembling fingers, she opened the car door, threw herself onto the front seat, turned the key in the ignition, and put her foot boldly down on the accelerator, so hard that the car jerked and stalled for a brief moment. "Go!" came the female Bigfoot's voice in her head. "Go! Get out of here now!" She tried with a feeble effort to be less ungainly on her feet as she pressed down the accelerator, and thankfully the car rolled away. Emma observed a Herculean-sized, ambiguous, shadowy figure in her visor mirror, hurtling towards her car, but she increased her speed, so the dark, swirling mass became all but a satisfying tiny little speck on the horizon that soon ceased to be a threat. She had got away in the nick of time. She instinctively knew the dark shadow she had seen was Daygard, who she was in no doubt was a very angry male Bigfoot that obviously had an axe to grind against human beings. But then again, according to the female Bigfoot, could you blame him? Daygard had had his hand deliberately blown off by a hunter. Was it any wonder that he was as mad as hell? Emma realized that in her obvious angst she had been holding her breath for far too long, but she took some deep, rejuvenating gasps of fresh air to steady her nerves, and when sensing she was out of danger, relief washed over her like a warm, comforting shower. It took a while for Emma Paisley to compose herself, to come to terms with the idiosyncratic event that had only just transpired. It was hard to accept that she had been pursued by an irate male Bigfoot who was missing a hand, and against all the odds she had managed to get away. She dreaded to think what Daygard might have done to her should he have caught up with her in time, and was very grateful to the female Bigfoot for giving her due warning. If she was to tell anyone her nonsensical story, she was in no doubt they would never believe it, not even for a moment. It seemed so fancifully far-fetched, and yet she knew that what had happened was rarely real, and she could feel her heart pounding wildly in her chest, and was still trembling from the aftershock. "I need a stiff drink," she told herself, "to calm down these flustered nerves of mine. I feel like a pigeon that has had a run-in with the family cat, and escaped by a mere hair's breadth." Emma's GPS sufficiently guided her to the Horse and Hound. It was 6 o'clock in the evening when she walked into the bar. It looked like a pub you would find in England, but when she learnt the landlord was formerly from London, was it any surprise that the bar was so English in every regard? She could see a scattering of cars parked outside the bar, situated next to a long line of interesting shops, all with green awnings and shiny polished glass. There was a distinctive vintage look to the street, where large, fabulous hanging baskets filled with pretty summer blooms, along with colourful pot plants, lined the street. There was a hairdresser's, a bakery, a greengrocer, an esoteric shop, selling dream catchers, unusual stones and tarot cards, a bookshop selling second-hand books, a delicatessens, and an ice cream shop, along with a few other shops containing interesting, eclectic-looking articles of interest. All the shops were closed, apart from the bar, of course, and an authentic-looking Italian restaurant. When Emma trotted into the bar, looking slightly dishevelled and worse for wear, with creases in her dress that clung to the back of her legs, she was greeted to a hum of lively, bustling activity. The bar was busy and clearly doing a booming trade. You could hear the cheerful chatter of people's voices, merry upbeat laughter, and the tinkle of ice in glasses, as people knocked back their drinks on this warm summer's evening. Emma noticed a tall, lanky female waitress, carrying a tray laden with delicious-looking bar food, filled with exotic, colourful concoctions that reminded you of summer holidays spent on faraway beaches with golden sands and turquoise waters. She was delivering all this to a large gathering of appreciative people in the corner of the bar that appeared to be celebrating someone's birthday, for there was much raucous cheering and clapping going on. Emma noticed people glancing at her curiously once she entered the bar, but she didn't care. They could gawk at her as much as they like.
She refused to feel self-conscious. She needed a drink, and a drink fast. She slank down onto a bar stool opposite the bar and got the undivided attention of the bar manager, who said to her, "You look like you need a drink, ma'am." "Is it that obvious?" Emma Paisley asked. "It's been quite the day, I'm afraid. You wouldn't believe half of it if I even told you about it. I've had some days in my life, but this one takes the biscuit."
"I know what you mean, ma'am. I've had days myself like that. Do you want to talk about it? I'm a good listener, you know. They don't put me behind this bar for nothing," he said, giving her a wink.
"Not really. There's some things I'd rather not talk about, if you know what I mean. That's why I'm here, if you must know, to drown my sorrows, and drown them I will. I want to wash away my memory of the last few hours, and if I never remember them, that will just be absolutely perfect as far as I'm concerned."
"I know the feeling, ma'am, all too well. I always need a drink myself, when life gets on top of me. So what is it that you would like to drink, ma'am? I'm a keen listener, so if you want to spill your guts, be my guest. But I'm also pretty nifty when it comes to conjuring up some magnificent-looking cocktails, even if I say so myself. I'm quite a magician in that regard, with quite a reputation in these parts, I hasten to say."
"Well, surprise me, then. I mean, I've noticed some of the trays going to people in this bar, with very exciting-looking drinks inside of them. So look at that table, I mean, at the far end of the bar. Those people are getting completely bladdered. Something like that would be perfect for me. Just lovely."
"Well, I like to be challenged, ma'am," said the bar manager. "Keep my customers guessing with my inventive concoctions, some that I've named myself. How about I make you my favourite cocktail, but I can't tell you the ingredients. They're secret. I call it Pigs in Space because after you've drunk one or two of these lethal things, you'll be floating on air. You don't need to buy one of those excessively expensive tickets to go to space, like some of those insanely wealthy billionaires. You'll get there on your own with my lethal cocktail," he chuckled.
"That sounds exactly up my street. You're talking my language. I'll have one of those with lots and lots of ice." "Thank you very much," said Emma. "Pigs in Space. Now that's a name for a cocktail I won't forget in a hurry."
There was a handsome man staring at Mrs. Paisley appreciatively. He gave her a warm smile, and his kind green eyes danced with merriment.
"You've been warned, ma'am. Todd is not joking when he tells you these cocktails of his are lethal. Lethal they most certainly are. You can't get away without tumbling out of this bar after a few of those. You might not even be able to stand up. Put those cocktails of hers, I'm sure she's going to have more than one, on my tab, would you, Todd? I would love to treat this lovely lady here. It seems like she needs some pampering."
"Don't get any ideas," said Emma. "I'm a married woman, but if you want to spend your hard-earned money on me, I'm not going to argue. Be my guest."
"Well, it's a pleasure to buy a beautiful lady like yourself a few drinks, even if you are a married woman. Why are always the best ones taken? That's what I want to know. Your husband, I hope he realizes, is a very lucky man," said the handsome stranger, smiling warmly at her. "My name is Paddy Dunblane, by the way, and you are—"
"You want to know who I am? My name is Emma Paisley."
"Emma Paisley. That's a nice name. It rather suits you, I think. I haven't seen you around here before, Emma. What brings the vibrant likes of you to our small, unassuming town? I assume you're not from around here, because I never forget a pretty face in a hurry. And you, yes, you I would remember."
"Well, that's shrewd of you to notice. If you must know, I'm escaping that husband of mine. We had a bit of an altercation. He was being extremely unreasonable towards me. I was dreadfully upset by it all. I got into my car and drove and drove and drove
and now here I am. You're quite the spirited woman then, Emma Paisley. I like it a lot. Sounds like you put up with no nonsense from anyone. You're my kind of spirited woman. Lots of spark in you. That man of yours needs his head examining, upsetting such a lovely fine lady like yourself. If you were my girl, I'd wrap you up in cotton wool and keep you safe forever. Good job I'm not your girl, then, said Emma with a mischievous wink. I can't stand being wrapped up in cotton wool. Things that get wrapped up in cotton wool get forgotten about, and sometimes even discarded. You, Emma Paisley, I could never forget you, said Paddy Dunblane smoothly, laying on the charm as thick as butter. There are some people you never forget, and I hasten to say, Emma Paisley, you are one of them. The moment you walked into the bar, I noticed you, as did everybody else, I'm most sure.
The bar manager, called Todd, presented Emma with the most exquisite-looking cocktail that she'd ever seen in her entire life. The bottom was yellow, the middle was an aquamarine-looking green, and the top was a bright pink colour.
Here we go, ma'am. Take a taste of that. Tell me what you think. Am I a good master of conjuring up cocktails or not?
Both men watched Emma as she took a couple of sips of the very decadent-looking cocktail. It tasted of strawberries, pineapple and rum. They laughed at her startled reaction when she rolled her eyes in the back of her head.
Goodness gracious me! That would knock out a rhino. It's hell of a strong, but I like it. I like it very much. Even so, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to walk out of this bar in a straight line after a couple of these. But then again, why not live dangerously? Life is for living, and I intend to take the bull by the horns tonight. That's the right spirit, ma'am. People come to the bar to lose themselves, and I help them do it. There's nothing like a strong drink to do that for you. And pigs in space, it's a miracle cure. You looked like you needed a stiff drink, ma'am, if you don't mind my saying so. I couldn't help thinking when you arrived in the bar that you looked like you'd had your feathers ruffled or something. She has had her feathers ruffled by her unappreciative husband, Paddy Dunblane interjected. Her husband has been giving her a very hard time. Tell me about your husband, Emma Paisley. What kind of a man gets to marry such a lovely lady like yourself? I'm very intrigued. What kind of a man is my husband? You're asking me that? Asked Emma, glugging back the alcoholic cocktail, rolling her glass forward along the table towards Todd for a refill. Now that is a very good question. You want to know what kind of a man my husband is? He's a prize cat. That's what he is. He's unreasonably angry. I bought a dress that was too small for me. He wants me to take it back to the boutique. See what I mean by being unreasonable? I told him I would lose the weight to get into that dress, but the man doesn't believe a word of it. Talk about being offensive. Why would you want to lose weight, Emma Paisley? You're absolutely perfect as you are, said Paddy Dunblane. You wouldn't want to be any thinner. Personally, I've never liked thin girls myself. Who on earth wants to cuddle a pile of bones? I couldn't think of anything worse. Me, I like a woman you can cuddle, a woman you can hold on to. Some of these skinny models you see on the catwalk, they don't look as if they've eaten a good meal in years. Before long, Emma seemed to have created quite a gathering around her. She completely lost her inhibitions. A couple of those lethal cocktails, and Emma found herself acting out the role of Hercule Poirot, and had everyone in stitches, clapping appreciatively, and ploughing her with yet more alcohol. Emma was enjoying being the centre of attention, but she was beginning to feel like a floppy rag doll, and was secretly dreaming of her comfortable bed at home. What she would give to have a quick cat nap right now. Emma did not know how she managed to escape the bar that night. It was a miracle of note. But she pulled her car keys from her purse
rattling them in her hand in front of her besotted admiring audience that were hanging on to her every word, most especially Paddy Dunblane, who was the most besotted of them all, looking up at Emma with devoted puppy-dog eyes, and telling all who would listen that he'd fallen hopelessly in love with the most beautiful woman in the entire world. "Emma, oh, Emma, you are so beautiful, so beautiful." The man had it bad, but Emma always had a mesmerizing effect on people, and was blindly oblivious to her magnetizing charm that unintentionally reeled you in, like the bait at the end of a fisherman's line. "I need to go and get something from my white Peugeot," she said, slurring her words. "I will be back in a jiffy, I promise you that. I just need to get something that I want to show you all. It's all about what I'm going to show you when I do another demonstration for you of murder on the Orient Express." "Don't be long, love," someone called after her. "Oh, we're going to miss you." "Shall I come with you?" asked Paddy Dunblane eagerly. "No, Paddy, you stay there. You can barely stand up straight. You're worse than me," said Emma, waving an arm. "I told you, I will be back in a mo." Even in Emma's inebriated state, she knew she needed to escape the bar, where she'd created quite an impression. It had been a challenge to reach her white Peugeot, without staggering rather awkwardly on her feet, and very nearly tumbling on the ground in a couple of near misses, as the ground she walked across appeared uneven. She knew any more of those lethal cocktails inside her, and she would be wheeled into the mortuary. She slunk gratefully into her car seat, glad to finally be there. Her trembling fingers rattled rather precariously with her key, but finally she managed to fit it into the keyhole. The engine of her car started up, and she rolled away from the bar, driving down sequestered country roads that were so dark that only the moonlight spilling generously through the sky made this tenebrific trip a whole lot less intimidating. Emma was straining to see clearly, as she drove somewhat recklessly through half-closed eyes, something she'd never have done had she been more sober. The silhouettes of the tall, lofty trees were ambiguously vague, rather like dark cardboard cutouts that menacingly framed both sides of the lonely dirt road. It was when Emma had been rattling around in her white Peugeot for over 20 minutes that she began to realize that in her bladdered state that she should not be driving at all. Her mind was whirling, and everything around her began to spin. She could feel her eyes drooping, as if it was all she could do not to fall fast asleep. What was she thinking, driving in this state when she was 2 sheets to the wind? It was amazing she hadn't driven into a tree or something. It was as if suddenly she remembered the dangers of drinking and driving, that often came with severe consequences. How this invaluable information happened to seep into her intoxicated mind, she did not know. But she knew one thing. She needed to pay prompt attention to the judicious advice that demanded her attention, that was telling her to stop driving at once. Emma obeyed, pulling over to the side of the road and parking the car. Seconds later, she had drifted off into a deep sleep at the wheel. Emma awoke to the sound of someone banging on her car window. "Ma'am! Ma'am, it's me, for God's sake! Wake up! It's me, your daughter Charlotte! Wake up!" Emma opened her eyes very slowly, to see her daughter Charlotte staring at her through the driver's side window. Emma's head was thundering. She had a booming headache from hell. She opened the car door slowly, to look up at her daughter. "What are you doing here, Charlotte?" she asked, looking perturbed, and rather confused at that. "What am I doing here, Mum? Is this a joke? I've been worried sick about you. You never turned up for your drama classes this afternoon. Your students were waiting for you. Everybody was worrying about you. Dad got a call from a frantic Helen Greensborough. She said you never arrived for your drama classes, And furthermore, you never even bothered to come home, nor did you contact anyone to tell us where you were. Dad told me all about your fight over a pathetic dress in a boutique that you insisted on buying, even though it was far too small for you. He told me how you stormed off belligerently out of the house in quite a mood. And if that wasn't enough drama, the bar manager from the Horse and Hound called me to tell me you left your purse behind at the bar. He was worried about you because he thought you were rather inebriated. He was concerned about your welfare. Some people actually care, you know. All I can say is thank God that you had the sense to pull over to the side of the road like this. My God! You were playing Russian roulette with your life, Mum, driving drunk like this. You, of all people, should know better. You could have been involved in a fatal collision or something. Worse still, cause somebody else's death. Me and Dad could have lost you. It doesn't even bear thinking about. Oh, Mum, honestly, look at you. You're quite the sight. And you're dreadfully drunk. What the hell were you thinking? I don't know, love, all right. I guess I wasn't thinking at all. But you know your father. He just really upset me, going on and on about the size of that dress and that I spent too much money. That's no excuse, Mum. People, when they argue, they settle their differences, don't they? But no, not you. Never you. You storm out of the house like an angry windstorm, before Dad's even got a chance to talk you round and to make you see some sense. That's why I became a drama teacher, love. I love drama. You know that about me. Charlotte threw her arms lovingly around her mother. Oh, I'm so relieved you're all right, Mum. My God, you stink of alcohol. How much did you actually have to drink tonight? It sounds like you drank an entire brewery. Maybe I shouldn't even ask the question, because I don't think I'm going to like the answer. Well, I had enough, love. That's all you need to know. I drank a set of cocktails, pigs in space, guaranteed to take you to the moon. That's what the bar manager told me. Oh, Mum, listen to yourself. I thought as much. Honestly, you're incorrigible. Everybody's been worried sick about you, and you don't seem to care a jot. I feel angry with you, Mum, but relieved at the very same time. I'm afraid you're going to have to leave your white Peugeot here. We'll pick it up tomorrow, but you're coming home with me now, understood? And I'm driving. Don't worry, I'm making a note as to where you've left the white Peugeot, so we can pick it up easily. But I don't want to leave my car unattended, dear. I love my white Peugeot. Tough, Mum. You can't possibly drive in your condition, and there's no way I'm leaving you in the car tonight. You've got to come with me. The following afternoon, Emma Paisley had slept in late. Luckily it was Saturday, so she could be forgiven for taking things easy. But Emma squirmed with embarrassment as she reflected over the last 24 hours. She had awoken feeling disorientated and rather confused, with what could only be described as the quintessential hangover from hell that she wouldn't wish on her very worst enemy. She barely remembered the events of the previous day or night, and in her muddled, blurry state was struggling to distinguish between fact and fiction. She started to recall encountering a Bigfoot on her trip outside of Seattle, when she'd stopped to relieve herself behind a tree. It had been so surreal for her. She was wondering if it had all but been a dream. It was not a dream, she told herself, as the memory of having to flee from that day guard character seemed hauntingly real. She couldn't recall a time when she'd been more afraid, with her heart virtually leapfrogging through her chest, when at a brief glance through her visor mirror, a great big Herculean-sized beast had come charging towards her, and she sensed she was lucky to have escaped with her life. It seemed she had exacerbated Dayguard's anger by relieving herself on his turf, sending out the wrong kind of message. She could remember the female Bigfoot so clearly, and her kind, soulful, generous eyes. It was the female Bigfoot that had helped her escape Dayguard in the nick of time, with her prognostic warnings. My head is killing me, she thought, feeling aggrieved that she had drunk so much. She sat up with a start. The curtains of her bedroom were drawn to keep out the bright light of the afternoon sun, which had enabled her to sleep in late. She was grateful that her long-suffering husband had been so considerate. What must he think of her juvenile antics, barging off in the way she'd done to drown her sorrows in a bar, long way away from home, and wilfully abandoning all her responsibilities, like a spoilt, petulant teenager. She tingled with abject shame as she realised she'd let down her drama pupils at St. Clair's by failing to turn up to rehearsals, and caused them all unnecessary worry. What the hell was wrong with her? She glanced at the bedside clock and was mortified to see it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The entire Saturday had been gobbled up by her hangover. "Oh, there you are, Mum," said Charlotte, coming into the room with a concerned-looking father by her side. She had in her hand a glass of Tylenol, which she handed to her mother. "I thought you might need this, Mum, after all the drinks you had last night. I'm guessing you have a thundering headache." "You've guessed right, love," said Emma gratefully, drinking back the Tylenol. "My head is banging like a drum. I honestly don't know what possessed me to drink so much alcohol. Those pigs in space cocktails that I was given, oh my word, they were lethal. I don't know what possessed me to drive in that inebriated state. I'm just so grateful I pulled over to the side of the road, and that you came to pick me up. I don't even know how you managed to find me. Honestly, I feel so ashamed, so dreadfully ashamed."
"You do look as if you've been dragged through a hedge backwards, love," said her husband sympathetically. "But never again must you ever drink and drive. We cannot afford to lose you."
"We wondered when Sleeping Beauty was ever going to wake up," said Charlotte. "Do you know, when I brought you home, you completely passed out on me. Dad had to drag you into the house. You were out cold, Mum. All I can say is thank God I found you last night sleeping in your car on that sequestered country road. I mean, you could still be there now. What were you thinking, Mum? Running away from Dad like that, over a silly little dress? You missed your drama rehearsals at St. Clair's. Your students were in a right state about you. Helen Greensborough most especially. She was terrified you'd been in some dreadful car accident. I was also scared that something terrible had happened to you, Mum. You don't know what you did to all of us. Dad admitted to me that the two of you had quarrelled, and that you just sauntered out of the house in a huff. It reminded me of when you ran away from your breast reduction surgery. I know, sweetheart, you don't have to tell me all this. I already know. Didn't I just say that I am so sorry, so ashamed? I just got so upset with your father. I got carried away." Reginald Paisley sat down on the bed by his wife's side. He took her hand in his and stroked it gently.
"You scared us, love. You gave me quite the scare, you did. And it's all my fault. I blame myself for this. I shouldn't have made such a dogmatic fuss about that dress you purchased. I succeeded in upsetting you far too much. And you know what? It wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it at all. You're far too precious. And that dress, well, it means nothing, does it? If you want to buy 100 dresses that are far too small for you, at ludicrously insane amounts of money, then be my guest. It's none of my business, and I will say no more about it. But I will say this. I'd like to remind you that we need to eat at times and pay our bills. But beyond that, you can do whatever you want with your money."
"I'm sorry, Mum. Dad was right to kick up a fuss about that dress," Charlotte interjected on her father's behalf. "I take his side on this. You're exploiting the resources of the planet, buying needless stuff you're never ever going to wear, and I'm sorry, but you're not. It's grossly impractical and obscene, if you ask me." "Well, you're right, love. All this fuss over a dress. Honestly, what am I like? I'm definitely taking it back. It wasn't worth all this fuss. And your father's right. I'm never ever going to be able to fit into it. I'm delusional."
"You don't need to take it back, love. As long as you're in one piece, that is all I care about. Everyone was so worried about you," said Reginald lovingly. I'm horrified to think that you went off to a bar to drink all on your own. You do realize you could have been involved in a dreadful drink-driving accident. I would never forgive myself if anything bad were to happen to you, or if you were locked up in jail for harming another human being, all because of a pathetic dress. It's ridiculous if you ask me. I know. I wish you wouldn't blame yourself, Reginald. This is all on me. All this is my fault. It's the way I react to things. I take things so personally at times. I'm appalled at myself most of all for drinking and driving. Please don't tell anybody what I've done. I'll never live this down. I can't believe I did this. Never, ever again. I'm just so grateful you picked me up, Charlotte. You have no idea. How on earth did you manage to find my car?
It was a stroke of luck, I guess, said Charlotte. But I'm so glad you had the sense to pull over and park, Mum. You were dead to the world, out for the count you were, when I found you, that is. But you'll be glad to know I went to the bar to pick up that purse for you earlier this morning. But we're going to have to go out there again. Please tell me you will never carry so much money around with you. It's insane. $800, you've got to be kidding. I know, love. I don't normally carry cash around at all. Well, I'm glad to hear it. I met Todd, the bar manager, who served you those very strong cocktails. He was relieved to hear you were all right. I took the liberty of phoning Helen Greensborough to tell her you were fine. She practically cried with relief, Mum. Everybody was so grievously concerned about you. Don't you dare ever do this again.
Believe me, love, I won't do anything of the kind. I've learnt an invaluable lesson. And if I told you what had happened to me in the last 24 hours since I marched out of this house, you wouldn't believe me anyway. You wouldn't believe a word of it. I can't even tell you what I've been through, but it's quite a story, and I don't want to repeat it again. Well, I'm glad to hear that, Mum. When you're ready, I'll take you to pick up your white Peugeot. I believe it's still parked where we left it on that country road, but I do know where to find it. I will recognize the landmark anywhere. It was 7 o'clock in the evening when Charlotte pulled down the sequestered country lane in search for her mother's white Peugeot, with her mother sitting at her side in the passenger side seat.
That's strange. I can't see your car anywhere, Mum. It was definitely parked by those trees there. You see that tree with the left-hand branch broken down at the side there? That's where you parked your car. There's no way that there's another tree exactly like that. That was where your car was parked.
But are you sure, love, that I parked here on this road? I mean, I was as drunk as a skunk, wasn't I? It was very dark. And when you came to pick me up, it's easy to get confused. I could have parked it anywhere around here. You couldn't possibly be mistaken, Charlotte.
I'm not mistaken, Mum. I'm certain where the car was parked. I remember distinctively. Charlotte pulled up on the corner of the road. She parked her vehicle and looked at her mother nonplussed, frowning. But I don't understand. Your vehicle was definitely parked here. I know it was. I remember that tree so clearly. It's a distinctive landmark.
I still think you're mistaken, love. One of these roads looks pretty much like another, if you ask me.
I'm not mistaken, said Charlotte, looking bewildered. Charlotte got out of her car, and Emma got out after her daughter. Charlotte began examining mud tracks in the middle of the road. Your car was definitely parked here, Mum. See these tracks here? I know they belong to your car. You were definitely here last night. This road is very muddy from the rain they recently had here. Oh, my goodness, Mum, look over there. Something on the edge of the road. It looks like a crumpled piece of metal. Mum, you're just not going to believe this.
Oh, my goodness gracious me! I can't believe it! What is it, dear? The lump of crushed metal over there. It's what's left of your car. What the hell happened to it? But that can't be my car, love, gasped Emma. But, Mum, it is. There's nothing left of your car. It looks like it's been in the knacker's yard and been crushed. All I can say, Mum, is thank God you weren't in it. Thank God I found you last night when I did. I don't know what could have happened to your car. How does this happen to a car in the middle of nowhere? That it gets crushed like this? This is just the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. I was thinking much the same, Charlotte. It is very bizarre. I can't imagine what could have happened here. Oh, Mum, you're not going to believe this. Look at this, Mum. This is insane. Everything is getting weird around here. Look at this footprint. Who has feet this size? They're ginormous. These footprints are right next to your crumpled car. What the hell is going on here, Mum? Emma didn't answer her daughter. She froze to the spot. She recognized this place. This was where she had relieved herself, on the way to the bar. Then she saw him. She froze with terror, as standing there staring at them through the trees was a powerful male Bigfoot, and Emma could feel his anger as he stood there with legs outstretched and his fists beating the air furiously. Charlotte, I want you to go to the car right now. Get in now. Don't ask questions, just get there now. Straight away, do you understand? Ma'am, what are you talking about? You're scaring me. Get into the car. Do you understand what I'm saying? Get into the car right now. Charlotte could see her mother had grown pale. She could hear the fear in her mother's voice. So she obeyed at once and dashed to the car, with her mother following close behind. Both dived onto their seats. Let's get out of here now, love. Now put your foot on the accelerator as fast as you can and don't look back. Do you hear me? Don't look back. Oh, my God, said Charlotte, glancing through the visor mirror. There's a male Bigfoot behind us. He's running after us, Mum. Oh, Mum, he's waving his fists at us. He seems to be angry. Go, love. Put your foot down and get out of here fast. Charlotte, with a pounding heart, needed no further encouragement. She literally put her foot down on the accelerator, and they were out of there as fast as they could go. When the Bigfoot was all but a speck on the horizon, and they knew that they were out of harm's way, Charlotte immediately parked her car on the side of a road. Mum! Oh, Mum! My heart is pounding in my chest. I'm breathing so heavily. Did you see what I saw? Did you see a male Bigfoot running behind us? I've never been so frightened in all my life, Mum. I could feel his rage. I was so sure he was going to kill us. His name is Daygard. He's very dangerous. He's missing a hand. It was blown off by a hunter, I believe. He was after me because, believe it or not, I relieved myself on his turf, on a tree, exactly where I'd parked, believe it or not. And then, when I returned last night, I parked in a very much exactly the same spot. I mean, what were the chances of that happening, love? Daygard saw me as challenging him. I know this because a female Bigfoot I encountered when I was relieving myself warned me to get the hell away from him. And then I returned, returned to the same spot. I went straight back to the lion's den, would you believe it? Honestly, what am I like? You think Daygard crumpled your car, Mum? He must be hell of a strong. Oh, I don't think it, love. I know it. He did that to my car. There is no doubt about it in my mind. My God, Mum, I think you'll think twice about running away from Dad again. If this is the kind of pickle you end up in, believe me, love, it's not going to happen again. 2 weeks later, everyone clapped and applauded when the show Murder on the Orient Express came to a close. And as usual, Helen Greensboro was the star of the show. But no one could deny that with a drama teacher as good as Emma Paisley, how could anything go wrong? Unless, of course, you're taking a trip with her down a sequestered country road and you decide to relieve yourself. So there you are. That's my story.
Do you know that is just an amazing story? I loved every minute of it. It was absolutely fantastic. And Emma Paisley, what a character. What an absolute character. Imagine having a drama teacher like that. Fantastic. But talk about relieving yourself in the wrong spot and then ending up there again later at night in a drunken state. She was very lucky not to be in that car, because the Bigfoot day guard clearly crumpled it up. So what a lovely story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.